TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Welcome to another edition of the RF Video Shoot interview series. Today we're joined by legendary manager Gary Hart. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, my man.
My very first question for you would be how you broke into the wrestling business, and were you a fan growing up?
I first became interested in wrestling when I was a kid. I used to go visit my uncle in Southern Illinois, and we would watch matches from the Kill on it. Not the Kill, but the guys that wrestled at the Kill. It was at, what was the name of that building? The Chase.
Right.
It was an early morning show, and first wrestler I really saw that I really liked was Rip Hawk. Oddly enough, I ended up managing him about 15 years later.
Wow. So, did you know you wanted to get into the wrestling business when you were younger?
Well, I sort of got in by accident. I was a competitive swimmer, and I was at a swim meet in Fox Lake, Illinois, where Billy Gales, who was one of the big names in Chicago at the time, he was also a matchmaker for Fred Kohler, and I got to know him. And as time went by, he trained me and broke me in 1960.
What was the training like?
Very difficult, very difficult. Probably more so hard on the guys of my generation, because there were a lot of guys, in their late 40s, early 50s that were finishing up their career, and they like to come into the training class and stretch us pretty good. And so I paid my dues.
All right. Did you find taking bumps a harder aspect to learn as far as picking up the business, or the psychology?
Well, psychology. Anyone can fall down. But learning how to pace yourself to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, I think is the most important thing. And having good opponents. And I was fortunate that I had Billy Gales, Johnny Case, Johnny Gilbert, Bad Boy Joe, Bobby Manicoff, quite a few old-timers that weren't as disgruntled that their career was over and would actually go out and try to have a match with you and teach you how to have a match.
All right. What are some of your early memories of your first matches?
To be honest with you, it was so long ago.
Right.
It was over 47 years ago. I remember the match that I remember. I don't remember my first match, but my second match I remember because it was the Marigold Arena. That match I remember. I wrestled a guy by the name of Tiger Malloy.
Right.
And I remember I went 15 minutes through.
Huh.
That was my memory. But like you say, 47 years ago, it's pretty hard to remember.
Right. What were some of the early territories that you worked as a wrestler?
My first two that I actually wrestled in was Chicago, which consisted of Wisconsin, Ohio, and parts of Indiana. And then once I left Chicago, I went on to Detroit, where I wrestled for a gentleman by the name of Bert Ruby, and we wrestled in the Michigan area. Those were the first two territories that I wrestled in. And that's where I met George the Animal Steele. At the time, he was wrestling under a mask by the name of the Student. I was his manager, and I helped break him in.
Right.
Was the first guy that I really helped bring to national prominence. Guys before I had Angelo Poffo and Johnny Case, but they were well established. George was probably my first project, someone that I really tried to help to understand wrestling. I had been in 3 years at that time. He was just starting, so he was my first project. He was my guinea pig. I did a hell of a job on him, I believe.
Now, as far as wrestling and managing, what made you switch from manager?
I really wasn't that great. I was a ham and egger. I could have competed and made a living, but I realized early on that I had a good eye for talent. I could see a guy and learn and know how to develop a guy. I don't know where I learned that. It just was something that I had. And I learned pretty quickly that my big success would be finding other people and packaging them in the right way and give them a little direction and take care of the office business. I was always very good at that. So I pretty early on, I decided that I would be a much better manager. I did leave Detroit and I went to Amarillo and I wrestled there for about 6 or 8 months. I really didn't care for Amarillo. I came from Chicago and Detroit. Amarillo was a culture shock to me.
Right.
I mean, where I grew up, You could eat 24 hours a day. Movie houses open 24 hours a day. Pool halls open 24 hours a day. Cities that never sleep. And I went to Amarillo, Texas. And it was culture shock. I hated it out there. I couldn't stand it. I wrestled for the Funks. For about 6 months, I decided this isn't for me. I had to get out of there. And I went to Dallas and with Carl Von Bronner and Al Costello. And I started managing full time after that. That was my mainstay, was those two guys.
Do you think your experience as a wrestler helped you become a great manager?
No, I don't. I just think it was an innate ability I had. Like I said, I had a good eye for talent. I dealt well with others, especially promoters. The power structure never affected me. I was never afraid to get fired. I was never afraid for someone to say no to me. So I think, I was a natural born manager. I think anyone can learn to be a wrestler, can't learn to be a great wrestler, you can't learn how to draw money, but a good manager, you're born with those abilities and abilities that you pick up on the street. I was a street kid from Halsted Street in Chicago, so I came from the inner city, so I know how to deal with people, and I believe that probably as a manager, I knew that I could see other guys, how to position them.
Right.
And I just picked it up and went on with it.
Who gave you the name Playboy?
Myself.
Okay.
When I started, I was Hurricane Hart. Billy Gels gave me that name. And as soon as I left Chicago, as you know, Playboy Enterprises comes from Chicago.
Right.
And I liked the name. So when I went to Bert Ruby in Detroit, I changed my name to Playboy Gary Hart.
How did you actually end up working for Bert Ruby?
Bert Ruby, I was in Chicago managing Angelo Poffo and Johnny Case. And I believe in 1961 or 62, Buddy Rogers lost his world title to Lou Thesz in Toronto. On my birthday, matter of fact. I believe it was January 24th, 1961. And when Buddy lost the title, the business in the Chicago area really, really became bad. Shortly after that, Tootsman and Vince McMahon and Kohler Karani decided to pull their talent out of Chicago. And Fred Kohler brought a guy in by the name of Jack Pfeffer. Right. A lot of people may not be familiar with him, but he was a rinky-dink promoter. And I was told by my mentor, Billy Gales, not to get involved with this guy because if I did, it would carry a stigmatism about it over the years. So he set me up to go to Detroit. So I left Chicago.
How'd you wind up working with the Sheik and all that? What were your initial impressions of the Sheik?
Well, Sheik was a very special person to me. I lived at his house. He was a father figure to me. He allowed me to go on TV and learn how to be the guy I became. He allowed me to pick the talent that I wanted to manage. I loved him to death. He was a wonderful guy. I will say I never made a lot of money with him, but the experience that I gained from him was invaluable.
How far did the Sheik go to protect his character?
As far as humanly possible. He would never speak in public. And if you would even try to call him Eddie, you were in a lot of trouble. I mean, the Sheik was very, very, very protective of his image. He wouldn't talk to anyone unless he had a one-on-one relationship with you.
Right.
He would not talk.
Did he ever work some of the green guys?
Not really, not that I remember. Fred Curry, who I couldn't call green, he had been in the business about 2 or 3 years, and he was Bull Curry's son, and Bull Curry and the Sheik both were very good friends. So Sheik wrestled Freddie quite a bit.
What are some of your early memories of the matches with him and Mark Lewin?
Oh, just pandemonium. I mean, the Cobo Arena or the Cincinnati Garden or in Columbus or Dayton or Toledo. I mean, they packed their buildings, and him and Mark Lewin probably had some of, and Bobo Brazil would be the two guys that really were responsible for really drawing the money. The rest of us were just icing on the cake, but
right.
They were the guys that packed the people in.
What were your initial impressions of Mark Lewin?
Oh, Mark Lewin, I met Mark Lewin in my early days in Chicago. I met Mark in 1961. We hit it off right away. We became friends and have remained friends for 50 years, just about.
Did you ever pattern your style as a manager, I guess, after anyone or anything?
Not really. More or less, I tried to present myself in a manner that never took away from the talent I represented. I never wanted to be a Jimmy Hart. I never wanted to be a James Cornette or a guy like Bobby Heenan. I didn't want to be the center of attention. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It fit that perfectly. But for me, I was more of your laid-back manager. I took care of my business in the office and preparing the guys for the match and the direction we're going. And I would get involved occasionally at ringside if need be, but I never tried to be the show.
Right.
I wanted to be, represent the guy and never try to do anything to take anything away from him. I didn't want him to say, oh, we like this guy, but we hate Gary Hart.
Right.
I wanted them to hate him because I realized he wrestled every night. I didn't. And my job was to present him in the best light and to get him over as best I could. And if I got involved or tried to become the show, then it would just distract from him. So I always tried to be like secondary. I never was, but I never tried to be the show. But by being the guy in the corner, you're going to get recognized and people are going to hate you anyway. So I knew that. So I more or less tried to make sure that the focus was on the piece of talent that I was managing.
Back then, could you make a full-time living in the days of the territories as a manager?
Oh, God, yes.
Okay.
See, I never looked at myself as preliminary talent. I always got main event money. If you weren't willing to pay me what you paid the talent I was representing and the talent we was wrestling, I wouldn't come to your territory.
Right.
I always got main event money. I got a share of the purse.
Did the boys back then see managers on a lower tire?
Some managers they did, some managers, because a lot of managers were looked at as guys that pulled legs or passed gimmicks. I steered away from that. My work came from who I picked, how I developed them, how I presented them, who I picked them to work with, what kind of programs I allowed them to be in. But most of it, important, is know when to take them off the main event, drop them down on the card, and get them some wins on TV to reestablish them. So therefore, I wasn't looked at as, a guy that pulled legs. When I managed you, I managed you. Our deal, when I made a deal with a guy, you listen to me and I will make you money. When you're unhappy with me, tell me and we'll part ways. But as long as you're with me, I'm the one that's responsible for the direction. And guys saw that in me early on. And they liked that because they knew if I was taking care of their business, they didn't have to worry about anything but getting to the arena, showing up on time, and having the best match possible.
So not only were you the manager, but you were kind of like a shoot manager as well.
Oh, no, I was a shoot manager. I never managed anyone for the office. I never pulled legs for somebody for a living. If I took you on, then I was your manager and you were expected to listen to me,
right,
and take my advice. And over a period of time, after I was right enough times, the guys, they would listen to me and know that I had their best interests at heart. Yeah, I wasn't your typical manager that worked for a wrestling office and every guy that came through,
right,
I managed. I didn't do that.
Okay. From Detroit, how did you wind up in Amarillo?
I was contacted by Dory Funk Sr., who was a good friend of Eddie Farhat's.
Right.
And Sheik Ed Farhat. He would wrestle in Amarillo quite a bit. And Senior was looking for talent. And the Sheik said, I got a kid in Detroit. And at that time, Jim Mars, who was the student, had left Detroit, who I was managing, and he went to Pittsburgh for Bruno Sammartino and became George the Animal Steele. And I wanted to take a venture, and the Sheik said, I can get you booked at Amarillo. Would you like to go? And I said, hell yeah, I'll give it a shot.
What are some of your early memories of Dory Sr.?
He was a rough guy. He was a real rough guy, a fair guy. First guy that ever paid me what I really deserved and opened my eyes how I should be paid. I worked a lot with his sons, Dory and Terry. Art Nilsson was there at the time. Ricky Romero was there at the time. It was a great territory. Very long trips, real long trips. no air conditioning in the buildings. I mean, it was horrendous. But there was a guy that took a desert and turned it into a paradise for him and his sons, and did very well for many, many years.
What were your early impressions of Terry?
Tell you how I met Terry Funk. I was wrestling his brother Dory in the Amarillo Fairgrounds, and they had set up a match. Terry had been at training camp with the Kansas City Chiefs, and I was in a match, as I said, with Dory Funk Jr., and the plan for the evening was to switch me from wrestling Junior and start wrestling Terry. So at the time I was using a move called the eye claw, where I would grab you by your eye, and I would always get disqualified.
Right.
The whole idea was once I locked it in, I would cut my fingers with a razor blade, so it would bleed down their face. And I had Junior in an eye claw, and I heard this roar coming from the crowd. I'm thinking, where's this coming from? And it was Terry Funk running to the ring, and he tried to jump over the top rope and caught his foot and fell right in the middle of the ring. And Junior said, "By the way, Gary, that's my brother Terry." That's how I met Terry Funk.
That's great. Who did you manage there? Because I know you actually managed Dusty Rhodes there, a young Dusty, right?
No, not in Amarillo.
Okay.
I didn't manage anyone in Amarillo.
Okay, you were just working.
I was just wrestling. I took a hiatus. I was very disappointed when George and I broke up. I really liked him. Spent a lot of time developing him, and I just wrestled there. I was tag team partners with Art Nielsen, and wrestled a lot with Dory and Terry. I wrestled a lot with Ricky Romero. I wrestled a lot with Gory Guerrero.
Right.
So mainly there, I just wrestled. I did not manage.
What about Paul Boesch? How did that come about?
Paul Boesch was the promoter in Houston, Texas, and excellent promoter, but a very difficult guy. I can't say I had the greatest relationship with him in the world, but I had decent relationship. My problem was Fritz Von Erich and Ed McLemore took the booking office out of Houston, which was owned by Morris Siegel, and Paul Boesch was Morris Siegel's right-hand man. And I came in and helped Fritz switch the booking office. And I think there was always a little bit of resentment towards me. Not a lot. Most of it was directed towards Fritz, but because I was with Fritz, some of that heat came to me. But I would say Paul and I, we had a decent relationship. Sometimes it was great and sometimes it was horrible.
Right. Speaking of George Steele, what was he like outside the ring from back then?
The same in many ways. I mean, he didn't need turnbuckles and
Right.
things, but George, he was a football coach, school teacher, football player, amateur wrestler. He was your typical jock. That was him.
Speaking of Fritz Von Erich, how did you wind up actually meeting him for the very first time?
In Detroit, when George Steele was wrestling as a student, Fritz Von Erich would come into Detroit, and Fritz, for many years, was the bad guy, the big-hated bad guy. But when he came back to Detroit, they put him with George Steele and I, and he became a big fan favorite. And he told me, he said, someday I'm going to have a territory, and when I do, I'd sure like for you to come and help me, run my business and present talent for me.
Right.
So 2 or 3 years went by, and when I was in Amarillo wrestling, he came through Amarillo to wrestle me because it was claw against the claw, because he was really over with the head claw and I had the eye claw. It was a perfect match.
Right.
And he asked me, he said, "Are you ready to make a move? Come to Dallas." Ed McLemore and I are in the process of trying to win the booking office out of Houston and bring it to Dallas. He said, "If you come to Dallas, you'll have a lifetime job and you could help me run the business there." Because he had known me from Detroit. He knew I had ideas. He knew I knew how to develop talent. So, I had a good thing going with him.
What were your initial impressions of him? Did you like the guy?
Fritz and I had a very peculiar relationship for over 25 years. I was his booker. I was his matchmaker. I was his TV producer. I was his advisor. I was many things, but I don't think I was ever a friend. I don't think we could ever call each other friends. We were completely different. Fritz was a guy that he was happy if he was out playing with his cows or driving his tractors or shooting quail or dove or going deer hunting or going wild hog hunting. Me being an inner city kid, those things did not interest me. And the only thing him and I had in common was our love for wrestling and the way we made our living. Other than that, him and I, we were complete at the other end of the spectrum. But all in all, we worked well together for over 25 years.
Your very first run with Fritz, how did that end?
The very first run with Fritz, I was with Carl Von Erich and Al Costello. And as I said, I had had a problem with Paul because I was the guy that helped Fritz take the booking office. So the first time we drew a decent house where I should have been paid, Carl Von Erich and Al Costello got $150. And I got mine, and I got $75. I went to Paul Boesch and I said, hey, I get the same that my talent gets, and I expect to be paid $150. And he said to me, well, if you were anything other than a manager, maybe I'd consider paying you that. When he did, I smacked him right across his face.
Fritz?
No, Paul Boesch.
Okay, yeah, Paul.
And I left.
Right.
And I was called to Fritz's office. And at Fritz, Danny Pletches, probably Ed McLemore, and they're all upset with me. Why did you leave? Houston, why did you smack Paul Boesch? You can't do things like that. And I said, hey, you two guys, fuck Paul Boesch out of his booking office.
Right.
And now you're worried about me smacking him because he didn't pay me?
Huh.
You can all go fuck yourself. I'm out of here. And I left.
Right. How much of a student of the business had you become by this point?
I was well entrenched.
Okay. Was there anyone you saw up to this point in your career that you knew would make it big?
I knew George the Animal Steele was going to be something really special.
Right.
I knew that. I knew that for sure.
In Amarillo, were you really given the name Gay Gary?
Yeah, that's another reason I was very unhappy with that. Because when I went in there, I had no idea what he had in mind for me. And when he came, he told me, he said, you're going to be Gay Gary Hart, and I want you to act gay. And I said, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And he said, what do you mean you ain't going to do it? Gorgeous George did it, Johnny Barron did it. I said, I just don't think it's right. I don't think it's right to demean homosexuals. I just don't feel that's right at all. And I'm not going to present myself as someone that is something I'm not. Now, if you want to call me Gay Gary Hart, that's fine.
Right.
But I am not going to try to imitate or make light of someone that's gay. I just felt that was really, really wrong.
How'd you wind back up in Detroit?
Well, when I smacked Paul Boesch and told Fritz and McLemore to go fuck themselves, I went home, back to the Sheik and Bert Ruby.
Did you like moving around so much, or?
Yeah, I never minded that at all. I thought it was a great adventure.
How did you and Fritz resolve your issues finally?
Well, we never really did, ever. I mean, we had a working relationship, but I don't think we were always at odds. But on this particular occasion, I was back in Detroit. A good friend of mine, Billy Red Lyons, who wrestled quite a bit in Texas, and he would come to Detroit, and another guy by the name of Killer Carl Cox. They were coming into Detroit, and Texas, that's going to sound like, I'm a prima donna, but business had really taken a tumble because I really got over there. I created a lot of excitement and drew a lot of money. And when I left, Carl and Al really had lost their luster. They neither one were good interviews. They were both in their mid-40s at that time. And I was a young kid that generated a lot of heat. And Fritz started sending messages back and forth with Billy Red Lyons and Carl Cox to tell me to give him a call. And I was very candid with him. I said, hey, if he wants to call me, give him my number and tell him to give me a call. So after a few months, he did. And we straightened out the money problems. He understood that whatever the percent was that my talent got, I got. To make it very clear to you, in those days, the main event got 32% of the gross. And if there were 4 guys, each guy got 8%. When I was involved, it was 5 1/4 apiece. If it was the guy I represented and our opponent, we would split 16%. 3 ways. I think it was 5 1/4 a piece, something
Right.
like that. And once that was ironed out and I knew that my money was guaranteed, then I said, okay, and I went back.
Do you think Fritz had more respect for you since you didn't roll over and just take it?
Oh, of course he did. Of course he did, because he realized early on that I had something to offer. I helped him take the booking office. I helped make him a very, very successful promoter. So yeah, he definitely knew that Gary Hart was someone he wanted on his side.
Whose idea was it to pair you with Don Jardine?
I had met Don Jardine just slightly in Amarillo on my way out. And when Fritz had contacted me, he said, do you have anyone you would be interested in bringing to Texas? And at the time, I really didn't.
Right.
Because I didn't know how long I was going to be there. Because if the money wasn't the way they said, because they had told me the first time that I would be figured in on the main event money. That was all understood the first time. So the second time, I was leery. I took a chance. And Fritz said, do you know a guy named Don Jardine? I said, yeah, I met him in Amarillo. He said, how would you like it to bring him in to manage him? And I said, I think it'd be great. And then we decided to put a mask on him.
What was the magic between you two?
Don and I?
Yeah.
Don had been in the wrestling business for 12 years. He had been lied to, cheated, misused, abused in every way possible. And he trusted me. And he understood that my main concern was his best interest, to take care of him. And after a few months, he understood that Gary Hart's the best thing that ever happened to me. And in many ways, he was the best thing that ever happened for me.
I was going to ask you, how instrumental was he to your career?
Well, a lot of people say Gary Hart made a lot of guys, but Don Jardine made me. Don Jardine gave me the opportunity to become who I became in wrestling. Without Donald, my career would have flourished at some time. I don't know exactly when. But he was the guy that really put me over the top and really made me someone that promoters would listen to and say, hey, ask Gary what he thinks.
Do you think he could have been a world champion?
Oh, of course he could have. The only bad thing about Don was promoters were scared to death of him. Donald was not above slapping a promoter around. If a promoter tried to lie to him or cheat him on a payoff, Donald would have no problem smacking them around.
Right.
So for that reason alone, they would never give him a position as world heavyweight champion. Could he have carried that title? Of course he could have.
Memories of yourself going over to Australia for Jim Barnett?
Well, that also was Don Jardine. He was the one that made that possible. As I said, I went to Texas with him, and we really, really got over big time. I mean, he was such a sensation. And Barnett contacted me and asked if I would bring him to Australia. And Donald and I went, and he was tremendous. I mean, he did tremendous business with Mario Milano, Spiros Arion, Bob Ellis, Don Leo Jonathan, all the great guys of that time. Donald probably was the biggest, other than Bruno Sammartino. I think he did more dollar per arena business than anyone.
I guess, when in your career did you start getting more involved with booking? Around what year was that around?
From 1963.
Okay.
My deal was with a promoter. When I managed a guy, I was responsible for who he was wrestling, what match he was on, what angles he would work, the interviews that would be laid out. I was responsible for all of that. So as someone that was manipulating my guys really very, very early on, and then when I got involved in the booking as an unofficial booker,
right,
would have probably been 66, 67 with Fritz. Even though Danny Pletches would have been the booker of record, I was more or less responsible for a lot of the angles and a lot of the talent selection.
Memories of managing Ivan Koloff?
Oh, I managed Ivan in Australia. I had a good time with Ivan. Ivan was the first Russian to come to Australia, and the bad thing was he spoke no Russian.
Right.
And in Australia, it was a very ethnic country, A lot of Poles, a lot of Ukrainians, a lot of Greeks, a lot of Serbs, a lot of Lebanese. So therefore, a lot of people from the Eastern Bloc, they spoke Russian, or they could speak enough Russian, and they would holler and scream at Ivan in Russian, and all Ivan could say was "da" and "dobra."
Right.
But he got over really, really big in Australia. Drew a lot of money with Spiros Arion, the big Greek guy. Did very, very well with him.
Ivan has come out and admitted to having a drinking problem back then. Do you remember that at all?
Oh, yeah. Him, Rip Hawk, and Sweet Hansen got drunk 3 times in one day. We were leaving Brisbane, Australia. We used to be in Brisbane on Wednesday, and then Thursday we would be off. And I meet Ivan, Rip, and Sweet at the airport in Brisbane that morning. They were drunk from the night before.
All right.
We got on the plane and flew back to Sydney. It's about a 2.5 hour flight. And by the time they got back to Sydney, they had sobered up a little bit because I had asked Ivan and Rip and Sweet, please let's not drink on the plane, because don't want any trouble.
Right.
So we got back to the city, and I went to my place, and they went to the King's Cross, and they were coming to my house for dinner at around 6 o'clock that evening. So between the time they got off the plane until they got to my house at 6 o'clock in the evening, they had got drunk again. And when they showed up at my place at 6, Rip and Sweet were still walking, carrying Ivan. Huh. And Ivan, thank God, was a lovable drunk.
Right.
He was just a happy-go-lucky guy. So we all had dinner, and at the time, I had a penthouse in Sydney. My wife and I were there. And I had an extra bedroom, so I told Ivan, please take the bed and wake up in the morning, and we'll go out on the balcony and grab some sun and have a nice breakfast. So we put Ivan to bed, Rip and Sweet left. And but 2 hours later, my wife, she hears some noise. And she said, Gary, something's going on in the bedroom. Did Ivan fall out of the bed, or did he fall down or something? I said, I don't know. I'll go look. And I went into the bedroom, and Ivan was gone. The next day, I see him and Rip and Sweet when I come to the Sydney Rush Cutters Bay Stadium, and I said, what happened last night? He said, I met Rip and Sweet, and we all got drunk all over again. I got drunk 3 times in one day.
Wow, that's funny. How'd you wind up in Georgia?
Well, Jim Barnett had sold Australia and bought into the Atlanta promotion, and by that time, I had been with Jim Barnett off and on for 6 years. And he asked me if I would come to Atlanta to help him with selecting talent and developing talent. So that's how I got that job.
Okay. What are your memories of Fred Ward?
Had no time for him. He was a fat bastard, a thief.
Why is that?
Because that's what he was.
Just a
bad
person.
He was a bad person. He treated wrestlers like secondary citizens, and I wasn't going to allow that. To me, he was just a fat bastard that had one little town.
Right.
I had worked for Jim Barnett. I had worked for Fritz Von Erich. I had worked for Johnny Darrell and the Sheik. I had worked for Frank Tooney. I mean, I had worked for big-time wrestling promoters and drew a tremendous amount of money by this time in my career. And for this fat piece of shit to try to tell me anything or try to screw me out of money,
right?
I had no time for him at all.
Do you regret working for Ward and not Dunkel?
No, I didn't work for Fred.
Okay.
I worked for Jim Barnett. Fred Ward had 2 towns. He had Columbus and he had Macon.
Right.
I didn't work for him. He was a promoter. I worked for Jim Barnett.
Okay. Back then, how dirty were the promotional wars?
Pretty dirty.
All right.
I mean, it was serious. It wouldn't be, they come around the arena, they cut your tires, take a shot or 2 at you on the highway,
right.
Try to run you off the road, things like that.
You also worked for Bill Watts. What are your memories of working for the Cowboy?
I love Bill Watts. I never had a problem with Bill Watts. All the stories I hear are probably true, but I never had that kind of relationship with him. Once again, I met Bill when Bill was beginning to become a promoter in Oklahoma. Fritz Von Erich and Vern Gagne and him went in to help Leroy McGurk, and I was sent in to be one of Bill's assistants. And I never had anything but good times with Bill Watts, every place I was ever at.
I was going to ask you, do you think his reputation as a bully is warranted?
Yeah, it is.
Right.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen anything firsthand, or
not directed towards me? To others, yes.
Right.
but never to me.
Anything you want to talk about regarding Bill? Or
Well, I'll give you a perfect example, Ox Baker. Every time Ox would have a match, Ox was a big, awkward guy who drew a lot of money. He wasn't the greatest mechanic in the world, but he was quite an attraction. And to me, the most important thing was, do you sell a ticket? Will people buy a ticket to see you? And if you can make people buy a ticket, I can work around you. I can put people with you that will make you look good. You don't have to be the greatest in-ring performer, but if you have the ability to make people buy a ticket, then I will take the time to surround you with talent that would make you look better than you really are. Where Bill's attitude was, he would book whoever he thought he wanted against Ox, and the matches sometimes were not too good. And I remember a couple of times he would come back and Bill would say, "Are you ever going to learn to work? You're the worst worker I ever met in my life." And really running down really, really bad. So Ox would come to me and he'd say, "Gary, am I really that bad?" And I said, "No, Ox, you're not that bad." I said, "Who the hell is Bill? He don't know how to work either." So a few days later, same situation in the dressing room. Bill gets on him again, screaming at him. And Ox stood up and he said, "Well, how would you know if I could work or not? Because you damn sure can't." And Bill said, "Well, how would you know?" And he said, "Gary Hart told me." And Bill turned bright red. I mean, just like steam coming out. And he just shook his head and laughed and walked out of the room.
That's great. You once called Jerry Jarrett a thief. Why do you say that?
He's a thief. He's a bum. He's a pig. He's a piece of shit. Tell you a story. I was in the Carolinas for Jim Crockett. Mr. Crockett was a quality man in every way. I was here with Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen. And Jim Barnett called me and said, "Gary, I'm doing my final tour in Australia, and I'd like to have you to be part of it." So I went to Mr. Crockett and told him that Jim Barnett had asked me to come back on the final tour for Australia. And Mr. Crockett knew the Fullers who was buying in to Australia. And Mr. Crockett asked me, he said, "Gary, would you do me a favor?" He said, "I know that when a new operation takes over, it's going to be some difficulties. And would you mind, trying to be as helpful as you possibly could?" And I told him, "Of course, Mr. Crockett, anything I can do for you, I'd be more than happy to." And I went off to Australia with that intent in mind. And Brute Bernard and I were the only ones of the crew that were cooperative. Mark Lewin would do nothing for the Tennessee talent. Chris Ikea, Mario Milano, Bulldog Brower, the Steiger brothers. No one would do anything. So Brute Bernard and I really became, the guys that got them established. And I wasn't looking for praise, or I wasn't looking for a thank you. But they never bothered to say thank you for what you've done here for us. So I left Australia, went back to Texas with Brute Bernard and Missouri Mauler. Had a nice little run there. Then Jim Barnett called and asked if I would come to Atlanta. And oddly enough, at that time, Missouri Mauler and Brute Bernard went to Atlanta too, but they went for the Gunkles, and I went for Barnett. Now, I had been Brute Bernard's manager and friend for many, many years, and had a real good relationship with the Missouri Mauler, and made a lot of money with both these guys. So we knew that we were going to competing promotions, but that was not going to affect the way we felt about each other. So when I got there, Bill Watts was the booker, and everything was going really, really well. Bill had some real problems with Fred Ward, and Jim Barnett sent him to book Florida and brought in Jerry Jarrett. Now here's a guy that looked down at wrestlers, thought that they were someone to abuse. I had just helped his uncle in Australia and his cousins, did everything in my power to help them be successful. And he comes into Georgia and he's going to tell me who I'm going to manage, how I'm going to manage them, and what I'm going to say and do on TV. And I said, "No, that ain't the way it is. I don't work for you, I work for Jim Barnett. He's very happy with me. I've been very successful with Jim. If you have anything to say to me, you tell Jim. So one day he told me, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to straighten you out. So I slapped him around a little bit. It was no big deal. He was a 160-pound guy.
Right.
I was 280. I'm a Chicago kid. I'd been in street fights since I was 6 years old. So it was no big deal. But he was very disrespectful to me. So I straightened him out.
How did that resolve after that?
I got fired.
Okay. I was going to ask you what happened. Did you leave George on bad terms after all that?
Well, I don't think it was good terms, but it didn't affect my relationship that badly with Jim Barnett because he also sent me to Florida.
I was going to ask you, how did you wind up working for Eddie Graham?
I didn't work for Eddie Graham. I worked for Jim Barnett.
Down in Florida, okay.
Yeah. Eddie was the promoter, but Jim owned a piece of the business.
Right.
My loyalty was towards Jim Barnett.
Okay. Memories of Eddie Graham?
Eddie was a hardcore guy, a very bad payoff man, which I did not like. I remember 4th of July, 1964, Jacksonville Civic Center. We had $50,000 house. Imagine, $50,000 in 1974.
Right.
Dusty Rhodes, Pac Song, paid Pac and I $500 apiece. 1%.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, I never liked him because of the way he paid his talent. And I would not have stayed without Jim Barnett encouraging me and sending me money from Atlanta.
Do you agree with a lot of people what they say about Eddie as far as being one of the best finish guys in the business? Or
I think Eddie Graham knew how to manipulate wrestlers. I think his finishes were obvious, knocking down referees. I think it became, maybe in the beginning it was unique, but as time went on, I think a lot of people, as soon as they saw a referee go down, they would start looking to the back. Was he a great man? Yes, in wrestling, but was he the smartest guy I ever met? No.
Why do you think Eddie killed himself?
God, I couldn't even fathom a guess why he would do something like that.
Right.
I mean, he had a wonderful son, Mike. I've always liked Mike. Mike was really a nice guy. He had a nice, lovely wife. He had a great business. I don't know why he would do that. How do we know why anyone would do something like that?
Right. A lot of people say he was involved with the wrong people, real estate and stuff like that. So.
Well, I mean, there are so many rumors. As far as factual information on things like that, I really don't know.
Take us back to the night that Dusty turned babyface in Florida.
Well, that was a unique situation because Jack Briscoe was the biggest thing that had hit Florida in years. And Dusty came in at the time when Jack was the world's heavyweight champion. And Florida was a situation, if Jack Briscoe wasn't on the card, it was very hard to draw money. You could get a house, but you couldn't do big business. And Dusty was a heel, along with Pac Song. And Bill Watson, Eddie, it was obvious to all of us that Dusty was becoming a fan favorite. Because him and I would do little things during the match where I would try to tell him something to do and he would rebel and tell me no, and I would demand he do it. He would jump out of the ring, come down and point it. So the people, we were giving them little hints that something was up. And then we did the final switch in the Armory with Mike Graham and Eddie Graham against Dusty and Pac Song. Can't remember the exact scenario, but it was something where Pac ended up hitting Dusty and knocking Dusty to the floor. And then Pac was beating on Eddie Graham, and Dusty came in and cleaned the ring. And from then on, he was the American Dream.
Did he produce as expected, or more so as a babyface?
Oh, yes. I don't think anyone, I mean, we knew it was going to be good, but I don't think anyone really understood what was going to happen. I mean, once he made that switch, it became the American Dream. I mean, we sold out every arena for 16 weeks. Now, that's going to the same arena every week.
And that can't be done today, so.
No,
Yeah.
16 weeks in a row. Every arena that we were in, Miami, West Palm, Orlando, St. Petersburg, Jacksonville, Tallahassee, everything was packed. And I mean, the people in Florida fell in love with Dusty, and business just skyrocketed. And I would say for my career, with the exception of Buddy Rogers, I never saw a piece of talent that packed arenas week after week like he did.
Could you ever sense that Dusty would become later in life, I guess, corrupted by power, in a sense?
I never knew him that way. I never thought Dusty was corrupt in any way.
Right.
Dusty was, I give you a little story. I met Dusty in 1967. The Sparta and I were looking for a new tag team partner. We went to the dressing room in Fort Worth, Texas, and over in the corner sat a kid, a blonde-headed kid with a pair of granny glasses down on his nose like this, like Benjamin Franklin, reading a book of poetry. So I said to Donald, that kid over there, he's a good look about himself. And Donald says, why don't we watch him? Maybe we'll make him our partner. So we went out and we watched him. He was very green, but he had some charisma. He really did. And he could capture the attention of the people. So I'm really the one, me and Donald, that discovered Dusty. And then, of course, I took him to Australia with me. And then, of course, we went into the Florida situation where we made the switch and he became from the plumber's son to the American dream. And then throughout Atlanta, always made nothing but money with him. When he was the booker in the Carolinas in the late 80s, I was the booker for Fritz Von Erich with World Class. And Dusty came to me and said, Gary, we're coming to Texas. Jimmy Crockett and I would like to have you be part of our company. So I said, fine. I left World Class and went with him and Jimmy and was never treated better in my life. I heard a lot of guys say a lot of bad things about Dusty. I saw a lot of guys come to the Carolinas driving beat up cars and wore out sneakers. And in a couple years, they were driving Mercedes, they were carrying Louis Vuitton, they were wearing Rolex watches, they were staying at Hyatt's rather than the Red Roof Inn.
Right.
Dusty made a lot of guys a lot of money, and a lot of these guys showed no loyalty and knocked him continuously, said horrible things. But I have known Dusty Rhodes since 1967, and he's precious in my eyes and one of my very best and dearest friends. Cannot say anything bad about him in any manner. Was he egotistical? Of course he was. He was Dusty Rhodes.
Right.
Was he power happy? I don't think so.
You said without Dusty, there would never be a Hulk Hogan or Ultimate Warrior.
No, there wouldn't be, or a Rock either.
Right. Why do you say that?
Very simple. Dusty Rhodes was the first flamboyant fan favorite. He was the first guy to stand up and talk like a heel but come across like a baby face. He invented pandemonium in wrestling. There was no pandemonium before Dusty Rhodes.
It's true. What do you remember about the plane crash in 1975?
Jesus, everything, I guess.
What were you thinking as the plane was going down?
I didn't have time to think. I was listening to my Walkman. I was sitting in the back next to Bobby, and we're coming out of Miami, and we called for approach to come into Peter O'Knight, and they say, well, the weather's moving across the bay. Maybe, should land in Sarasota. So we set our course to land in Sarasota, and as we were getting ready to go into Sarasota, a guy from Peter O'Knight called, the control guy, and said, we can get you in before the storm if you want to come into Peter O'Knight. So, we got maybe 5 miles, 6 miles on our approach, and we got socked in. I mean, we flew into a storm cloud, and we couldn't get out of it. We'd go up and we'd go down, but we couldn't break through. And Buddy wasn't instrument rated. He was on a visual flight plan. and they were giving us different vectors. And we finally broke through the clouds, maybe at 700-800 feet, and we were high and to the right. So we had to circle back out over the bay to make another approach to land. And as we started our circle, we flew right into the ocean. A moment before we hit, Austin Idol said, "Pull up, we're going to hit the water." So I reached down, popped my belt, and luckily, as the plane hit wingtip over wingtip, it drew me clear from the plane.
Wow.
And there I was in Tampa Bay at 2 o'clock in the morning, popped to the top of the water, realized I had survived. Didn't see Buddy, didn't see Austin Idol, didn't see Buddy Cole or Bobby Sheik.
Wow.
All I could see was a light way off into the distance, so I started swimming towards the light. Once I got closer, I came across Austin Idol, and Austin was panicking pretty bad. Couldn't make it in. So I told him just relax, lay back, and I brought him to the seawall. And then Buddy Cole, I heard him hollering, "Is anyone there? Is anyone there?" So I went back out and I got Buddy Cole.
Right.
Brought Buddy Cole into the seawall. He was pretty messed up himself. And then I went back out to try to find Bobby. Couldn't find Bobby. Looked for a while, I don't know how long. But I was getting weak by then. My head was open up 180 stitches, cut off my nose, lost my right eye, fractured my sternum, fractured clavicle, broken wrist, broken arm, broken leg, vertebrae in the back. And I was beginning to get weak, and so I thought, well, it's best, try to get out of this place we're at. It was low tide. The seawall was about 20 feet high.
Right.
But 5-6 feet above where I could reach was a ladder. And I had Buddy and Bob and Dennis to get down on their hands and knees. I crawled up on their back, crawled up the ladder, went to a house, kicked the door in, told them, we have horrible problems here. So they called the police, thank God. I went back down to the dock and dropped a boat over. There was a big boat hanging on. I hit the button and one end fell down for Buddy and Austin to get in. And then I went and sat under a tree and waited for the ambulance to come.
That's a crazy story.
Yeah, it was a trip.
How'd you wind up back in Georgia?
Well, I was to go to Oklahoma for Bill Watts because the time I spent in Florida with Bill, I was his assistant. And Bill wanted me to come to Oklahoma. And Jack Briscoe approached me. He owned a part of Atlanta. And he asked me what my plans were. And I told him that I was planning on going to Oklahoma for Bill Watts and to become his booker. And Jack said, well, would you be interested in being the booker in Atlanta? And I said, I'd like to talk to you guys about it. So he said, well, Jim's very excited. He wants you to come and take over the book. You and him did good things together in Australia. He feels comfortable. And Jerry Jarrett's no longer there. And we really need to resupply talent because Jerry brought in the Tennessee crowd. And this just didn't work in Georgia.
Right.
So that's how I became the booker in Atlanta, 1975.
Were you apprehensive about Tom Ernesto?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
What were some of your key moves as booker?
I think probably the best move I made was I put Bob Barton and Dickie Slater together.
Right.
Against Bob Armstrong and Robert Ford. I put Don Jardine the Sparta against Wrestling number 2.
Right.
I put Abdullah the Butcher against Mark Lawn. And when you have that kind of package, how are you going to miss? Then I had Bill Watts coming in. I had Dusty Rhodes coming in. I had Jack Briscoe coming in. I had Jerry Briscoe. I had guys from New York like Dean Ho. I had Dominic DiNucci. I had Professor Tanaka. I had a lot of guys. I had good connections with wrestlers. And because I wasn't your typical booker. I wasn't a Bill Watts. I wasn't an Ole Anderson. I wasn't a George Scott. I wasn't a domineering type guy. I would rather get you to do things my way because you trusted me and my vision rather than do it because you were afraid that I would fuck you on the bookings or I'd fire you.
Right.
I wanted them to trust me that I had the right idea. So that was a little different than most bookers. I wasn't your really bossy, over-dominating type guy.
Right. Why did you end up leaving Georgia once again? What happened there?
Well, you know, I had a way about me that I could get fired.
Right.
I was a guy that if I had something in my mind that I wanted to do, and as long as the crowds stayed good, then I would continue what I wanted to do. And even when you told me no, I would continue to do what I wanted to do. And it got to the point that Jim Barnett had had enough. And he said, Gary, you know, you've done a great job, but Fred Ward can't stand you. Buddy Fuller can't stand you. And Eddie Graham can't stand you. And I have to go with my partners, and they think you should leave, and I do too.
Huh.
So I said, that's okay, man, because I had a good run.
Right.
And I never held it against Jim. Jim was a friend of mine until the day he died.
You wound up working for Fritz again, I believe, right?
I left, when I left Georgia, I went back to Texas and took the book from Red Bastine. Red Bastine was the booker when I came in, and I took the booking job with Fritz, and I was there from 76 until 82.
Is it true you were responsible for training some of the Von Erich boys?
I trained all of them. Well, not all of them. I trained David, Kevin, and Carrie.
Did you think that they would be as big as they became?
Oh, of course. I was the one that pushed them.
I was going to ask you, out of all the boys, we always hear that David was probably the best.
Well, I can't say that. I think all of them were unique in their own way. Now, Kevin was the first.
Right.
And Kevin was one of the most handsome, well-received guys that I ever saw. Close to Ricky Martinell. I mean, you know, this, just to look at him, I mean, and he was magnificent. David was probably the best technical wrestler of the three. And then Carrie had something else. I mean, they all three were distinctively different. Where Kevin was the high flyer, handsome, looked like a guy that just walked off a movie set. David was this long, tall, gangly Texas kid that interviewed like his father and showed great anger in his matches and was really, really, really a good mechanic in the ring. And then Carrie, he had a little bit of Kevin. He had a little bit of David. But Carrie was the typical, and I don't mean I loved him to death.
Right.
I mean no disrespect, but he was your typical dumb jock, you know, the blonde. What you saw was what he was.
Right.
He was just a fabulous kid. They all three were completely different.
Is it true that Fritz didn't want to push him as hard as you wanted to push him?
Yeah, because, you know, in those days, if you look back and you look at a kid like Greg Gagne, you look at a guy like Mike Graham, both these guys were very talented guys, but because their father was the promoter, wrestlers didn't want to wrestle a promoter's kid and put his kid over.
Right.
So actually, a lot of people say, well, being Fritz's kid made him. No, it was a detriment because a lot of guys did not want to come and put over Fritz's boys. They didn't mind coming in and working with him.
Right.
But they didn't want to come in and put his kids over. And Fritz was afraid that they wouldn't be received as well as they were. But I was, like I said, I was always stubborn and hard-headed. And, you know, I'm sure he wanted them pushed as hard as I did, but by me being the one that says, hey, we got to do this, and constantly, it was easier for him to say, well, Gary wants it too. You
right.
know? But yeah, I would say I was the guy that was really the one instrumental in manipulating those boys and getting them started. I picked the right guys to bring in.
I'm going to ask you that next.
Okay, could we stop?
Yeah, I got to switch tapes anyway.
Oh, could we make?
All right, back to the Von Erichs. Do you feel that Fritz gets a bad rap in regards to the way he pushed his boys?
Yeah, I tell you a little story. I met the Von Erich boys in 1966. Kevin was probably, I'm thinking 9. David was probably 8. Carrie was probably 6. So I knew these boys their whole life, and they used to tell me in the dressing room. I've said this before, so I'll say it again. I was Uncle Gary to the boys. They had no uncles or no aunts, so they asked their father, "Could we call Gary Uncle Gary?" So I knew these kids since they were little, and it wasn't Fritz that wanted them to be wrestlers or demand. Fritz would have been very happy with David playing basketball because David was a better than average basketball. He was 6'10". Was very hopeful that he would have a career in the NBA. Kevin was an excellent running back at North Texas. Had bad knees. Hopefully, he would have played in the NFL. Carrie was going to the Olympics in 1980 for the shot for the discus.
Right.
And Fritz was preparing these kids for other things. He didn't demand that they were wrestlers. He didn't push them in to be wrestlers. They used to tell me when they were little boys, "Uncle Gary, when we get big, we're going to wrestle you, aren't we?"
Huh.
And Carrie and the boys, they would play games with me in the dressing room because I was closer to their age. I was very young at the time, too. And we always had a very special relationship. But for someone to say that Fritz pushed them into it, he didn't.
Okay.
They wanted to be wrestlers more than anything else.
Talk about training them. Who picked it up the easiest?
I would say mechanically, I would say David.
Okay.
For just the pure charisma, Kevin, and then Carrie. You know, he had the benefit of following his brothers, so he had high expectations. Everyone really thought that this kid, because the way he looked and what the brothers had done before him, and Carrie was good enough in his very first match that the people fell in love with him. I mean, it was a love affair between the Von Erichs and the Texas fans, but you got to take into consideration they had people like Don Jardine, the Spoiler. They had Killer Tim Brooks. They had Gino Hernandez. They had Maniac Mark Lewin. They had Killer Von Krupp. They had Tony Charles. They had Les Thornton. So they had a lot of guys that taught them how to have a match. Bruiser Brody. So, I mean, we had surrounded them with a great deal of talent and put them with guys that would go out and teach them how to, not to work, but how to have a match, to have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right.
And, they all caught on very well. And one thing I'm proudest of all the boys, Kevin, David, and Carrie, not so much Mike or Chris, because I wasn't really there when they started, but David, Carrie, and Kevin, they were all liked by the wrestlers. They were very respectful. They never had, "I'm a superstar." They were just one of the boys. I never heard them ever say, "Well, my dad's the promoter, and I'm going to do this," and that never came out of their mouth.
Right.
They were good, down-to-earth kids. And if they had been any different, I would have kicked them in the ass.
Right. I got lots of questions about the Von Erichs. So,
Okay.
how critical was it to bring in the right guys to work with the Von Erichs early on?
Well, as I had said earlier, a lot of guys didn't want to come and work with promoter's son. I
Right.
remember in Florida, I had no problem working with Mike Graham, in singles or tags. You know, I thought he was an excellent worker. He wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but we took advantage of that and used his size as an advantage to make him, overcome great odds. And I think Mike did a great job. Greg Gagne was another kid that I thought had a lot of in-ring talent, didn't have the most charisma in the world. And when you follow like a Vern Gagne or an Eddie Graham or a Fritz Von Erich, it's not easy to, look how many wrestlers' kids fail because they can't live up to their father. But I believe the selection of people that I brought for them to wrestle And I believe because they were nice, generally nice kids, I think that had more than anything else to do with it.
Do you think David would have been a successful champion?
Oh yeah, David could have been world's champion. He was going to be world's champion.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess. What do you think made the territory so hot back then?
The boys, the three young boys. You got to remember, in that day and age, until the Von Erichs broke in, really you had to be in your mid or late 30s to be a main eventer. I mean, young guys didn't really get an opportunity. Ricky Flair was a young guy that got an opportunity. And the reason I pushed the Von Erich boys, because I was 18 when I started. And Billy Gales afforded me an opportunity, to work on top at a very young age. So I thought, well, if I did it, why can't they do it? And I believe the youth factor, and we changed the whole demographics of who was watching. I mean, I had three good-looking young boys, the Von Erichs. I had Gino Hernandez. So, I had 5 or 6 guys that were all under 22 or 23. And we just started drawing kids and, a different audience altogether.
Right. How did the evolution of world-class TV come about?
Mickey Grant was with Continental Productions, and he came up with the concept of a new format to present wrestling, where before, as you realize, it was a small studio with maybe a couple hundred people at most, 2 cameras. And Mickey wanted to do it live from the Sportatorium with 6 cameras, full sound, additional lighting, microphones in the ring, in the turnbuckle, in the audience, using music, doing personality profiles, which would mean take a guy like a Von Erich or a Great Kabuki or a Michael Hayes and present them outside of wrestling, what they do in their spare time, a little profile of what is this guy all about, who is he other than the guy we watch in the ring. So Mickey brought a lot to wrestling that had never been used. And a lot of promoters, and Fritz and I had a lot of discussions, and a lot of heated discussions about the personality profiles. He couldn't understand the concept.
Right.
Why would a camera be there if he's at the gym? Or why would a camera be there if he's at a restaurant? Or why would it be a camera there if he was out driving in a car? But he didn't understand that was just a new way of presenting talent. Like Mickey Grant introduced close-ups where he would get the whole face in the camera. And it brought the guy closer to the fans. I mean, it's for the first time you take a guy and you fill the whole screen up with his face.
Right.
And when you took a guy into the corner where we had microphones and Texas, we hit hard, we kicked hard. It was very stiff.
That's what I heard.
We worked really, really stiff. A lot of guys wouldn't come to Texas.
A lot of people told me that.
Yeah, they wouldn't come because they'd get beat up and they would say, we don't want to do this.
Right.
And they would leave. But I think it was the whole concept, Mickey's format, all the cameras, all the sounds, personality profiles, the music, but most of all the young talent that we presented on the TV. And I really think that World Class changed the face of wrestling.
Do you remember a night or match that was the turning point in taking things to a new level?
There was many things, but I would say one thing that probably the thing that is most remembered is I brought the Freebirds in to Texas as good guys with the plan of switching them to wrestle the Von Erichs. And we set up this scenario where Michael Hayes was going to be the special referee at the Reunion Arena on Christmas night against Carrie and Ricky Flair. And I had used different referees, troubleshooting referees. And the Von Erichs would always get screwed. But I did a thing where the people voted for who would be the referee, and they chose Michael Hayes. And Michael Hayes got into an argument with Carrie, shoved Carrie. Carrie shoved him back. And Michael went to leave the cage. And as Michael went to leave the cage, Carrie went to tell him, no, it's okay. Ricky Flair hit Carrie in the knee with a back and drove Carrie into Michael, and Michael out through the door. And as that happened, Carrie's hanging through the ropes, and Terry Gardy slams the door on Carrie. He falls back. Ricky covers him 1, 2, 3, and the feud began.
It was great
The
stuff.
Von Erichs against the Freebirds, and they had a run for well over a year.
I'll talk about that feud coming up. I got some other stuff I wanted to ask you about before. How did the Great Kabuki come about?
I was traveled through Asia quite a bit with Jim Barnett when I was in Australia. Each year we would do a tour of Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, Bali, Macau, and Hong Kong. And we flew exclusively on Cathay Pacific. And I saw a pictorial of a Kabuki dancer in a long red wig and a devil's mask and a skirt and nunchucks. And I was always a big fan of Bruce Lee's and Sonny Chiba. I really liked the martial arts. And I always said if I could find a guy that could do the martial arts and also do catch-as-catch-can wrestling, it'd be another way to present a Japanese guy. Because you got to remember, at the time of the Kabuki, it used to be Japanese was enough after the war. You know, they hated Japanese guy. They'd drill the salt and they would do the bow and they would do the Pearl Harbor attack. But that era was over. We were all had Hondas. We were walking around with Walkmans. We had Seiko watches. I mean, the animosity to Japan was gone. But I knew if I could find a Japanese guy that could do the martial arts and do the wrestling and present him as a Kabuki with the mystery of the Kabuki and the violence of the samurai, then I would have a way to present a guy that the people would take time to look at, rather than just say, well, he's from the land of the rising sun, here's a Japanese guy, you're supposed to hate him. I developed Kabuki as not so much as a Japanese guy, I presented him as an attraction, and he got over unbelievable. I mean, he really, really got over big time.
What was he like outside the ring?
Very humble, very nice guy. Had been around for 12, 13 years, had wrestled as Takachiya, had wrestled as Mira, had basically been your middle of the card, get over guy. Had really had very little success, not because of a lack of ability, but just because the thing with the Japanese and Americans, you know, it wasn't that hatred was gone. It was like the Germans at one time, if you were Hans Smith or Walter Von Erich or Fritz Von Erich, you know, you walk around, you give the zig how, oh, you're a bad guy.
Right.
But though that was all over by then, and I just needed to find a new way to present an Asian guy. And when I saw the pictorial on Cathay Pacific, I said, that's the way to do it. Now, it took me a long time to find the guy that I wanted to do it with, maybe 3 or 4 years.
Memories of the matches with Jimmy Valiant and Kabuki.
Oh, easiest money I ever made. That was the greatest time I ever had in my life. 7, 8 minutes of pandemonium every night.
Right.
It was the greatest time. Had nothing but a good time. Loved Jimmy Valiant to death. He's a Chicago boy too. So him and I, we really enjoyed each other. And the Kabuki and him, I mean, they had some of the greatest matches in the whole world.
I guess with the Von Erichs, you know, they're notorious for their drug problems and stuff like that. When did you notice that they kind of had a problem?
You know, I mean, I think that's overblown. I mean, if we really stop and think, how did they draw so much money in so many places for so long if all they were drugs? Did they have problems? Yes, but that was the culture. That was the culture. I mean, they weren't the only ones. Their drug problems were prescription medication. And at that time, no one looked at prescription medication as something harmful. It was good. If you couldn't sleep, the doctor would give you something to go to sleep. If you wanted to lose weight, doctor would give you something for you to lose weight. So when we say drug abuse, let's say not street drugs. I'm not saying they didn't do, but I'm saying their major problem was prescription medication. And they didn't look at it as a drug. I know Fritz didn't, I didn't. And I would tell him on multiple occasions, we got a problem here.
I was going to ask you, did you ever approach Fritz?
Yeah, sure I did.
And what was his response?
He was in denial. It's only prescription, the doctor gave it to him.
Right.
I said, Fritz, this is a problem here. I don't care if it's a street drug or if it's pharmaceutical. When you're abusing, you're abusing. And it's easy to do. I mean, my habit, my whole life, I'll be right up front with you. I smoked marijuana. You can't smoke marijuana just anywhere. If I was doing pills, I could take a pill anywhere.
Right.
If I was doing coke, I could go do coke anywhere.
Right.
If I was doing alcohol, I could do alcohol anywhere. My preferred drug of choice was marijuana. So you had to go hide. You couldn't do marijuana everywhere.
Right.
So it was easier to do other drugs than it was the one I did. I didn't care for pills. I didn't care for coke. Didn't care for alcohol. But I've always enjoyed marijuana.
Right.
I mean, I could go back to my place, kick back, have a smoke, listen to some music, watch TV, troubles of the world go away. And it's not an addictive drug. So when we talk about drugs, abuse, I mean, there's multiple drugs, there's street drugs and there's pharmaceutical drugs and there's, benign drugs.
Right.
And they got involved in prescription medication and that it did them great harm.
Do you think it eventually hurt the promotion as well when they started no-showing towns and stuff?
I never saw them no-show when I was there.
Right.
I think what hurt the promotion over a period of time were the successions of deaths. Chris Adams getting sent to prison for headbutting a pilot on American Airlines. Mike Von Erich killing himself. David accidentally OD. And Gino Hernandez cocaine overdose. I think that did irreparable harm. I think it got to a point where we were presented as family entertainment, a Christian type situation with the Von Erichs portrayed. And I think the people said, hey, you're not what you say you are, and we don't want our kids watching. And I think that's
right.
was the thing that hurt more than anything else.
Which death do you think hit him the hardest, Fritz?
His first son, Jackie, when Jack died, his little boy, I don't think he ever got over that.
That was when he was electrocuted, I believe?
Yeah.
When Fritz started pushing Mike and later Chris, did you ever try to talk him out of it?
Well, not really, because, it would do no good. But I tried to present them when I was involved with them in a way that was acceptable.
Right.
I don't think anyone ever took Mike or Chris that they were going to be what the kids were. But I think by that time, Fritz, he thought any Von Erich would draw money and they wouldn't.
How great do you think Carrie could have been?
There's a lot of bad stories on Carrie, but if you watch 24/7, the kid was excellent. He was excellent. I mean, people say, he was a druggie, that he didn't know how to work, that he was lazy. All of that, if you watch him in his matches with Mr. Perfect, you watch him with Ricky Flair, you watch him with the Freebirds, you watch him with the great Kabuki. He was extremely good. He was very, very good.
Did you ever go out there managing against the Von Erichs where you thought maybe they're in a position where they could end up hurting themselves or their opponents at all?
No, when I was the matchmaker and TV producer, my rule was, if you come high, you don't work.
Right.
I'm not saying they never showed up high, but when I was the booker, that was not allowed and they knew it. If Uncle Gary saw him high, they knew they were going home that night.
Right. What are your memories about Gino Hernandez?
Gino was like a son of mine. I loved him to death. I know him since he was 12 years old. Used to work in Paul Boesch's office.
Right.
Was great talent. Was a tortured soul. The demons got him. But he was a great kid. A very, very nice boy. But just had some real bad demons inside.
Do you think he OD'd or do you think it was
He OD'd.
Okay.
He OD'd.
A lot of people say that he could have been
There's
murdered.
always stories, you know.
Right.
No, Gino had a tremendous cocaine habit. I mean, tremendous.
All right. I guess with the Von Erichs also, let me back up a little bit. You wound up leaving, I guess, for a little bit. Why was that before you went back?
I had a deal with all promoters that I worked for that when I would come in and take the book, whatever the average was for each individual town, just to make it very simple.
Right.
If you were averaging $1,000 in your town, and I brought it up to 2,000, I got an extra 100. If I brought it to 3,000, I got another 100. Every 1,000 I got you above your average, I got 100. And that deal worked for a long time really, really well. But once the Von Erich boys got involved and we moved into bigger buildings, I mean, I was doing 50 grand, 60 grand, 100 grand. When I came to Dallas, just to use Dallas as the example, and took over as the booker and matchmaker, Dallas was averaging $3,800 a show. My last show in the Reunion Arena, Ricky Flair and Carrie Von Erich, I did $108,000. So imagine how much they owed me.
Right.
And they didn't want to pay. And I told them, you know, that's not my deal. You either pay me or I'm out of here. Christmas week, I did $250,000 in Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Corpus Christi, and Amarillo. And I didn't like my payoff. And Fritz felt that the deal had been shot with the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. Why do I need Gary? So he fucked me on the payoff. So I left.
You went to work for, I guess, Ole for a little bit in Georgia? Or?
I was going in and out for Jim Barnett.
Right.
Ole was the
Booker, right.
With the great Kabuki, but I always had an ongoing relationship with Jim Barnett. I mean, ever since 1963 or 64, when I first met him in Detroit, I worked for him continuously in Australia and in Georgia and in Florida. I was always considered one of, and was proud to be considered one of Jim Barnett's boys.
How'd you wind up going back to Texas? How'd you reconcile with Fritz?
Well, I was in the Carolinas, and I don't remember exactly who called me, but I think it was Bronco Lubitsch, and he asked if I would come to the memorial show for when Kerry wrestled Ricky Flair. And at that show, Fritz approached me and, you know, how are you doing? What's going on? How's the family? And he said, you thinking about coming back anytime soon? And I said, not really, man. I'm really happy in the Carolinas. And he told me, he said, I really don't trust Kim Mantell, because Kim Mantell was made the booker after
right.
I was the booker. And he said, you really didn't trust him, and you didn't really feel that Kim...
That's my computer. Go ahead.
Really didn't feel Ken, you know, was someone that he wanted to keep long term, and would I be interested in? And I told him, no, Fritz, you know, I'm really happy. I always looked at being a booker as a day job, and then a wrestler as a night job.
Right.
And I was very happy without a day job. I mean, I was here in the Carolinas with the Crockett's and the great Kabuki. I had Mark Lewin and I had Kevin Sullivan with me. I had Don Kernoodle and I had Ivan Koloff and Nikita. I mean, I had a good little group of guys, and my only responsibility was to look after them and take care of their business and make their interviews and figure out what they're doing for the finish. So it was a beautiful job. And I really didn't want to go back and take that day job, as I used to call it. So a few months went by and he called me and he said, I'd like you to come back when you finish up in Carolina, because he knew I would leave Texas. I'd be gone 17, 18 months, and then I would always come back because my wife was a Texan and my two boys were born in Texas, and she really wanted to be home. And I wasn't the type of guy that would leave my family at home and I would go on the road. When I traveled from territory to territory, I would take my family with me. So my wife, she wanted to go home, and my boys, they sort of wanted to go home too. And so when he called, he said, I got a kid here, Chris Adams, he's really very, very popular, but I want to switch him and make him a bad guy to Russell, Kevin, and Carrie. Would you mind coming in and helping me switch him back and sort of help with the finishes and the programming? And you answer to me. You don't have to answer to Ken Mantell, which I never had a problem with Kenny at all. I mean, I didn't mind. I mean, I didn't have sour grapes or anything. It wasn't his fault that they hired him after I was let go or I quit, however you want to look at it. My problem was with Fritz and the payoff, and he didn't live up to our agreement. So I really had no problems with Kenny. So I agreed to the thing. I came back and I spent a few days with Chris Adams, and I let him know, how I operate and how I felt about things. And if he was interested, him and I would get together, which we did. And he had one hell of a run. He did great business there.
What are your memories of the program between you, Chris, and Kevin?
Oh, it was probably one of the stiffest programs ever, because Chris was sort of stiff too. And
right.
Kevin, I mean, he would come at you with everything he had. I mean, I never got beat up so bad as I did with those kids. The only one person that ever beat me like that was Dusty Rhodes and Bruiser Brody.
Right.
But I remember they had just great matches. I mean, it was, I remember the Cotton Bowl where really, I guess it was the thing that really put us over the top. We were in the Cotton Bowl, Kevin and Chris, and the angle was to be, if Chris would fire me, then everything would be okay, and the Von Erichs and Chris would be back together, and all things would be forgotten. So we had the match, and as the story goes, Kevin got to 1, 2, 3, got on the house mic, and he told Chris, if you get rid of Gary Hart, we'll put all this behind us, we'll go back and we'll be friends. And as Kevin turned to leave the ring, Chris picked up a wooden chair and he hit Kevin in the back, potatoed him. Potato is a word when you hit somebody really hard.
Right. And
it opened up the back of his skull. I think he had something like 25, 30 stitches. Bled profusely. The world-class cameras was right there. They pulled the ambulance in and loaded him up in the ambulance and took him to Baylor Hospital. Was on all the news, Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 11, all the networks, and people flooded the switchboards at Baylor. It was all in the headlines of the newspaper, another Von Erich tragedy, and Chris was the one responsible for it. So that really escalated it. And then when we got all we could get from Chris and Kevin, then we brought Gino back in. And then Gino and Chris against Carrie and Kevin. And we had a good long run with that. Ended up a year later at the Cotton Bowl, where I had Mark Lewin, I was managing Mark Lewin, against the great Kabuki of all things.
Right.
And Gino and Chris against the Von Erichs, and the losers get their head shaved. So, I mean, it was like a 2-year program that did tremendous money. I mean, it did very, very, very.
The houses back then were huge.
Yeah, they were. I think the Freebirds and Chris and Gino would have been only second to the Freebirds. I mean, they did tremendous business.
Memories of working with the Freebirds?
I loved the Birds. Michael and Terry, I met. Buddy Roberts, I had known from before as part of the Hollywood Blondes, and had nothing but good times with them. They were very cooperative, very enthusiastic about everything. They were great guys. Still have good relations with Michael and Buddy.
I was going to ask you, are you surprised that Michael is one of Vince's top guys right now?
No, I don't think so. I think Michael, I don't know, I mean, it's hard to say, is this guy capable or that guy capable? I think he's a good match, good fit for that organization. I mean, Michael had quite a career. He was a great interview. He had some real original ideas. I mean, the Freebirds were, I mean, come on, that was very original.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So Michael, I mean, he doesn't get as much credit as he should get. And I think he's a capable guy.
What about working with Abby? What are your memories of working with the Butcher?
See, I know Abdullah from Detroit. I first met him in 63 or 64. I had nothing but good times with Abby. The only thing I had problems with Abby hated to lose.
Right.
And, someone's got to lose, someone's got to win. Abby was very bad at losing. He didn't like to lose. But I always had a good time with Abdullah. I mean, I wasn't the type of guy that would bring Abdullah in on a weekly basis, because how much of that can you get?
Right.
But I thought he was much like the Sheik, much like George the Animal Steele, or even Andre the Giant, or Curtis Ikea. Short term, do tremendous business, and then before he got sick of it, let him go away, and absence make the heart grow fonder. And then when the time is right, you find the right opponent, you bring him back, and he's good for another little run.
Right.
But I've known Abby most of my wrestling career. Always had tremendous fun with him. Like him a lot.
As a booker, how would you persuade Abby to do the right thing for business?
I tricked him. I would trick him. I'd put him in a 2 out of 3 fall match that was really a 1 fall match.
Right.
And have him to lose the first fall, and then he would realize, oh, it's a 1 fall match. Jerry did it again. And I got him several times like that.
That's great.
You got to be clever.
Right. What about working with Bruiser Brody? What was it like working with Frank?
Bruiser, 1976 or 7, called me. I believe he was in Florida or New York, looking for an opportunity in Texas. And I told him right at that time, I didn't have a spot that he would be interested in. Only had things that would not be good for him. But for him to call me back in 6 months, which he did. And I still didn't have an opening spot. I told him to call me back in 3 months. And I told him, I'm not, fucking you off. It's just, really, I don't have something that you would be happy with. But as soon as I do, I'll bring you in. So he sent me photos of himself, and I really liked his look. He was tremendously green at the time. And he called me about 3 months later, and I said, yeah, I got a spot for you. Come on in. And when I saw him physically for the first time, I was sitting in my office, and he come through the door. He filled up the whole door. At the time, he was 320 pounds, big hulking guy, green as grass, didn't trust anyone, much like Don Jardine. Didn't trust you because he had been abused by just about every promoter. Oh, we're going to do this and that for you, and then, use him to get someone else over, use him as a tag team partner, or ask him, to do bumps when he's working with a guy half his size.
Right.
And him and I hit it off. I think because I was really honest with him and didn't bring him in until I could really use him. I think, I gained his trust. And over the years, I had no problems with Don Jardine. I had no problems with Abdullah, which I had no problems with Bruiser Brody. I had no problems with Curtis Ikea. Had no problems with Mark Lewin. I mean, I worked with a lot of guys with very, very difficult reputations, and I never had problems with them because I used them to the best of their ability. I didn't ask them to do things to help others. I asked them to help draw money. And Bruiser became a tremendous friend and started with me then and was with me until he died. I mean, when I was in the Carolinas and him and Stan Hansen were coming, he called me and asked, Gary, would you represent me? Which I said yes. When I was in Atlanta right before he died, I had talked to him about coming to Atlanta. He said, would you represent me? I said, yes, I would. So him and I were very close. I never had a problem with him at all.
I know a lot of guys like Bobby Heenan and Nick Bockwinkel have both said in regards to Brody that he'd be bad for business sometimes. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I never saw him that way. If you would try to take Bruiser Brody and make someone else look good at his expense or not pay him what he had coming,
right?
Yeah. But Bobby Heenan and Nick Bockwinkel were no different. You short Bobby on the payoff. What's he going to do? You misuse Bobby. What's he going to do? You misuse Nick Bockwinkel. It's easy to point the finger at other people. But I don't know very many big name wrestlers that you can fuck over and they come back with a smile on their face. The difference with Bruiser Brody, he would beat the shit out of you.
Right.
Bobby may call you an asshole and go away and knock you to everyone else. And Nick would probably do the same, where Bruiser Brody would get right in your face and punch you.
Right.
That was the difference. Brody was a man's man. If you treated Brody with respect, he showed you nothing but respect in return. Could we turn that off a little bit?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yep.
My hate. Could you send me a copy of this when you get it?
Without a doubt, definitely. I'll get your address.
Good, that's very important to me.
What are some of your highlights that stick out in your mind or stand out moments from World Class Championship Wrestling?
Many. I think the first Texas Stadium show with King Kong Bundy and Fritz Von Erich, Fritz's retirement match. That night, Carrie Von Erich wrestled Harley Race. David and Kevin wrestled the Great Kabuki and the Magic Dragon. I think the night of Christmas night when the Freebirds, that was probably the greatest angle I was ever involved in, not personally, but laying it out,
right,
positioning people to do the angle. I think that was a very, very special thing. I think the first time the Kabuki blew Bruiser Brody green probably was something that everyone would remember. I think probably my haircut match in Texas Stadium, the one-man gang against Carrie Von Erich. Carrie lost, Fritz would retire, never come around again. And if Moon lost, I would get my head shaved. I think that was a very special thing. I think the Cotton Bowl with Kevin and Chris the first time, probably Kevin and Jerry against Gino and Chris at the Cotton Bowl. I mean, the Freebirds coming in. I think all of those things were highlights in World Class.
Is it true, Buddy Roberts? I think Jack Victor was telling us he'd come in the dressing room and wear the same clothes to all the different towns, and he just carries his clothes in a bag or something like that.
Buddy was different. Buddy was different. But I don't remember anything. Like, I really paid no attention how you brought your clothes.
Right. And then we've heard stories about Kevin with Blade Shaw, with Cat and stuff like that.
Do what now?
With Kevin Von Erich, and there was a cat in one of the dressing rooms, and he took a blade saw and chucked it at the cat or something.
No, I don't
know.
Kevin would not do that. No, there are a lot of stories, but that would not be true.
Did anybody from New York ever attempt to bring you up there around this time period?
I was not a New York type guy. Like I said, I have nothing but respect for Bobby Heenan. I think, he was one of the greatest mouthpieces in wrestling. I think he was very entertaining. But Bobby managed guys for the office.
Right.
That wasn't me. My thing was I managed who I wanted to manage. I left when I wanted to leave. I took my talent with me when I left. And I wasn't the type of guy that New York would be interested in. They wanted more of a Lou Albano, a Bobby Heenan, resident manager,
right,
more or less. And I was never interested in that. I wanted to select the guys I managed. I wanted to present them the way I wanted to present it. I wanted to have the ability, when a promoter didn't pay us the way we deserved to be paid, that the talent knew that Gary was with them. Gary wasn't with the office. Even though Gary may be the booker, he was still with them. And by not being have that type of connection as the resident manager, it allowed me the opportunity to say, hey, why don't we go to the Carolinas? Why don't we leave and go to Georgia? Why don't we leave and go to Australia? Why don't we leave and go to Florida? So a promoter could never have me in that, like, he was never secure that Gary's here, because he knew that if Gary wasn't pleased with the way he was being used or presented or paid, Gary would leave. Gary's talent knew that if they were being mistreated or misused, Gary would go to the office, and if Gary couldn't solve that problem, Gary would come to them and say, let's go someplace else.
Right.
So I would travel with my talent. I wasn't a resident manager for a territory. And I think that's one of the reasons I was never an attractive option for New York. And I was very difficult, and I admit it. If I didn't get my way, there was hell to pay.
Right.
And I admit it, and I know it. But that's what helped me be successful, because I always told promoters, look at my track record. You know, I had a magnificent track record. I never failed any place I was ever at. Once I went to Texas and got with the spoiler, I had nothing but success for the rest of my career in developing and creating guys. So I was a little different than most managers.
How'd you wind up in WCW in Atlanta?
The last time?
The last time.
Okay. I had left World Class in 88, I believe. Al Perez and we left. I was disappointed. Fritz brought Ken Mantell back as one of the promoters.
Was there a lot of friction between you and Ken?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. I don't know how he actually felt about me.
Right.
But I never had any problems with Ken. I mean, I didn't agree with a lot of stuff he did. I didn't think he was very creative. I thought, you know, as far as taking a list of names, good guys and bad guys, and matching them up, you know, he could do that. Was he a matchmaker like a Bill Watts or Gary Hart or Dusty Rhodes or an O'Banderson? No, he wasn't in our league. Could he develop and create talent? Could he find a guy and develop him and create him and make him a main eventer? No, I don't think he could do that. But could he take the Freebirds and the Von Erichs and put them in matches and draw money out? Because the gimmick was already shot.
Right.
The angle was off and running. So he was successful. But Fritz brought him back in and wanted him to do some promotion. And I just said to myself, this don't feel right to me. And Dusty approached me, and I decided to go to the Carolinas. And then once Jimmy Crockett sold his business to Turner, Al finally left, and they asked if I could create another Kabuki. And I said, well, I can't create a Kabuki, but I can create something similar.
Right.
And they said, well, who would you get to do this? And I had known Duke Kiwanuka for many, many years, since Pac Song. Well, actually, since Texas. I wrestled him in Texas as a young boy. And Pac Song, and then the Great Kabuki. And they said, we got a boy named the Great Muta, Kenji Muta. And I said, yeah, I know him. I saw him on World Class. He was in World Class. Muta had been around a long time, but had never really been packaged or given any direction. So I got in touch with him. Matsuda and Duke got in touch with me. And I took him around to towns here in the Carolinas, just small towns, no big towns. I showed him some tapes of the Great Kabuki. And I told him, I want you not to be the Great Kabuki. I want you to be similar. You know, I want to present you as the son of the Great Kabuki, but I'm not going to tell everyone that in the beginning. I'm going to wait. And I don't want you to be mean and evil like the Kabuki. I want you to be like a superhero with a bad guy.
Right.
Because my biggest fear was I didn't want people to think I'm copying myself on the Great Kabuki. I wanted to make the Muta completely opposite, similar but opposite. And he became the Great Muta really, really quickly and did tremendous business. A great kid. Had a lot of good times with him.
When you first got in there, you managed Al Perez. What are your memories of managing Al?
Al Perez was probably the greatest athlete and the best legitimate wrestler that I ever managed. And a great guy. Had nothing but good times with Al.
We did a shoot with him years back. In your opinion, what happened with him, and why do you think he disappeared one day?
Well, I'll tell you exact story what happened to him. I went to the office and I lobbied for him to work with Ricky Flair.
Right.
And the first night he was supposed to wrestle Flair was in the Bayfront in Florida. And Kevin Sullivan came to me a few days before and said, Gary, Al Perez said he's going to shoot on Ricky Flair at the Bayfront. And I said, please, that's ridiculous. So he said, well, you better check. So I went to Al and I said, Al, did you tell someone that you were going to shoot on Ricky and take the belt from him? And he said, yes. I said, you got to be ribbing. He said, no, I can beat him. I'm a better wrestler than him. So I'll beat him and then they'll have to give me a big contract to drop the belt back. I said, Al, you can't do that.
Right.
I went to the office representing you to get you this opportunity. Now you're going to tell me that you're going to shoot on Ricky and take the title? You think Ricky's just going to lay down and let this happen?
Right.
He's not going to do that. And I'll say, well, I don't care. I can do it, and I'm going to do it in my hometown. And I said, you're going to do it without me?
Right.
I can't do this. I mean, I've worked for the Crockett's off and on for 20 years. You know, I can't do this. So he says, well, I'm going to do it. So I went to Kevin and I said, Kevin, it's the truth. He told me it was the truth. So they figured out the idea that Gary didn't show up. So the match couldn't take place. They said in a contract, if Gary Hart's not in the corner, the match is not validated and you can't have the match. So that's when Al and I separated.
Wow. Did any of the boys go up to him and, say, what are you thinking? Was that...
No, I don't think so. Only I did. I said
he was pretty much done with the territory right after that, right?
Yeah. That was it.
That was it. Wow.
Yeah. And I hated to see that, but I could not allow that.
Right.
I had to, even though I represented him and I liked him, I had a responsibility to the office and to the promotion. I was the one that went and asked, please give Al an opportunity to go around with Ricky.
Right.
And make big money. And then he wanted to
He wanted a contract.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Did you ever see the tension between Dusty and Flair behind the scenes?
I think that was really overblown. I think probably there was a little jealousy. But really, when you stop and think of it, what did Ricky and Dusty have to be upset about?
They're both on top.
They were both making more money than they ever made in their whole life. The Crockett's had a G1 and they had a Learjet. We were flying on the G1 or the Learjet. We were all making $200,000 a year. Everyone's carrying Louis Vuitton, Gucci's, or Halliburton's, all in Brioni suits, all driving Benzes or Lexus or Cadillacs or Lincolns. I mean, what was there to be angry about?
Memories of managing Larry Zbyszko.
Had a good time with Larry Zbyszko.
Good guy, too.
I got nothing but time for Larry Zbyszko.
How did things change after Dusty left the company?
The last semblance of any reality was George Scott. George Scott came in to replace Dusty for a short period of time. And he's the one that asked me to develop a Kabuki-like guy. And after that, they went into the committee. Right. And it was all downhill after that. The only thing they really had was Ricky, Terry, Sting, and Muta.
Right.
Which we did tremendous business for well over a year. But other than that, it was constant turmoil with everyone else. Everyone trying to get a bigger contract, get an extension on a contract. No one wanted to cooperate or do anything for anyone else. It really fell apart. Jim Hurd had not a clue. Jim Barnett was happy just to sit back and take his money. Jim Ross was very new at things like this. The committee that they developed, nobody on that committee had any booking experience. None of them was people that you could say were legitimate main event guys who had drawn a lot of money over the years. They were all novice, wanting to be bookers and manipulators. But very few of them had any real experience at running a company of that size.
Do you think Flair saw you as one of Dusty's guys and treated you any differently?
No, I don't. I think Ricky, Ricky was one of my boys too. You got to remember Ricky Flair, when he was world champion, Harley Race wanted that belt back, and Dusty Rhodes wanted that belt back. I was the booker in the Dallas office, one of the bigger territories, and I was constantly on the phone to anyone that would listen, praising Ricky Flair and the importance of keeping him with the title. No, I don't think Ricky saw me anything other than an ally to him.
Who put the J-Tex Corp together, and whose idea was that?
That was mine.
Okay.
I had a Jap, and he was from Texas, so J-Tex. It surprised me that people picked up on that. To me, it was just a throw-out line. It was like, I didn't want to just... There were so many managers there at the time, and I wanted to present it a little different. So, like I did in Texas with H&H, I wanted to have it like a corporate thing, a separate entity. So I had 2 or 3 Japanese guys with me. I had Terry Funk. So J-Tex, say we were a corporation that was controlled by Japan. And the people bought it.
Yeah,
To me, it was no big thing. I didn't set out and say, how am I going to do this? I mean, it was just something I did that clicked.
Memories of managing Terry Funk.
Terry Funk and we go way back, as I had said earlier in this interview, where I first met him. And Terry was tremendous. We had nothing but good times. And the great thing was that during that period, the last 2 matches of the evening was Muta and Sting, and then Terry and Ricky. And sometimes I would say, there's no way you guys can follow Sting and Muta, because they would just tear the place up. But Terry and Ricky would go out, and after a while, they would catch the people and follow. And that was a hard thing to do, to follow Muta and Sting every night, because they were so fresh.
Right.
I mean, here 2 guys look like superheroes flying around, spurting green, spurting red, and then come out Terry and I against Ricky, but we followed. I mean, we had great matches together.
Memories of young Sting. What was it like to work with Sting?
I never cared for Sting. I thought he was a selfish, egotistical bastard.
Why is that?
Because he thought he was more important than anyone else. He thought that wrestling owed him something. He had no respect for it. He had no respect for the tradition of wrestling. He had no respect for the struggle that other guys had to go through to get where they were at when it was given to him by Dusty Rhodes. And if it hadn't been for guys like Ric Flair, Al Perez, and the great Muta, I don't think he would have ever had any success at all. Because he would, if you watch one of Sting's matches, you see him on. I'm going to give you a little example. Here's a guy that had one of the greatest personas ever developed in wrestling. He was a super duper hero that children of all ages loved. Women loved him. And what did he do? He dyed his hair black, painted his face white, and came from the ceiling. Is that a smart guy?
No, you're exactly right.
Is that a guy that knows what's going on? Is that a guy that really cares about the fans and what he developed? That would be like me growing my hair out and turn it red and dress like Jim Barnett.
Right.
I mean, it would be ridiculous. So, no, I never had any time for Sting. I really didn't.
What about Lex?
Lex, probably I had a little more time for Lex than I did Sting. I don't think Lex liked being a wrestler. I don't think he appreciated wrestling. But Lex was a loner. He wasn't a guy that, he wasn't out and about like Sting. I just never had any time for Sting.
All right. I guess Ric Flair said, Terry said in a lot of interviews that he's done with us, he said that Flair was very instrumental in killing their program. Do you agree?
No, I don't. I think the committee was the one that wanted to kill the program because they wanted to have the Four Horsemen reunited, which was about as old as my grandmother's tits, Nobody wanted to see that.
Right.
But Ole, Arn, Tully, and Ricky, they all wanted to get back into that Four Horsemen thing, which had been done to the point where in the beginning it was great. at the end, it was old and tired. And I think that that's what Ricky wanted, and wanted to get away from working with Terry. But Terry had a great run. We had well over a year. You know,
Right.
every major city 3 or 4 times. How many times can you do the same dance with the same girl?
What were the ramifications of the night that you and Terry put the bag over Flair's head on TBS?
We didn't know we were going to get that kind of reaction.
Right.
We had no idea. You know, I mean, we thought, let's do something a little different. You know, something that would catch the people's attention, because Terry had just went through the surgery on his arm. And we said, hey, let's put a bag over his head. And the reaction we got, I mean, the phones lit up at TBS. And the second airing of it, they wouldn't show the bag. And there was a lot of heat, and I ended up taking the bump for that. They wanted to know who and why, and I said it was my idea, and I was the one who did it.
Huh. In your meetings with executives, did they ever bring up your firings from years earlier or no?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and I always told them the same thing, you know. Check my track record. That's what I always went on. Look where I was at, how long I was there, and how good business was when I was there. And more importantly, how it dropped off when I left. The only place I ever left that business didn't die was Texas when I left, and the Freebirds remained.
Right.
Any other place, with the exception of the Carolinas, when Gary would leave, business would go down.
In '89, a lot of people say, and I agree with the statement, that it was probably the hottest period ever in WCW until the NWR happened. Do you agree with that statement?
Well,
88, 89?
you see, it's easy to get trapped in who's the best, what was the greatest.
Right.
Was it a long, good run? Yes. Was it packed with talent? Yes. Now you look at all the people that left. I left, the Road Warriors left, Sid Vicious left, Steve Williams left, the Steiners left. It was more or less the talent that had that run had finished up and left, and the talent that came in to replace it didn't click as well. And I think until the NWO came around, and then it went back up sky high, but for a very short period of time.
Did you do any booking at all during the period of '89? Or was it pretty much just the committees?
It was the committee.
Okay.
I took care of Muda, and I took care of Terry. I figured their finishes, their promos, who they were going to be working against, which was Flair and Sting every night, so
Right.
that was a no-brainer. But what the finishes would be, and how we would structure tag matches and things like that.
Was there ever any jealousy between you and other managers like Cornette, Heyman, or Humperdinck?
No, not at all, because they weren't in my class, and they all knew it. You know.
What are your thoughts on Paul?
Paul Heyman?
Yeah.
I don't really know Paul that well. I only met him just a little bit.
Right.
Just a little bit. I thought he was overly energetic. I think he tried to be more of the show than some of his wrestlers. I always thought that anytime you try to call attention to yourself, you take away from the guys that you're representing. But I guess, you know, as all in all, he was okay.
What about your memories of Buzz Sawyer, his brief stint in WCW?
I liked Buzz a lot. Buzz was a guy that had a very, very bad drug problem also. I tried talking with him. I tried talking with the Von Erich boys. I tried talking with Chris Adams, Gino. But, you know, when the demon got your soul, man, it's no way out.
Right.
Buzz was terrific. But when he was on the shit, you know, you couldn't deal with him.
Right.
Even Ole couldn't deal with him. Ole and I were talking about the other day, and we both really liked Buzz a lot, but we couldn't even deal with Buzz at the end. It was when you're dealing with a drug addict, it's always, I'll do better tomorrow. I won't do it anymore, and I'm sorry, but you know, once
Right.
it gets you, man, once you give your soul to drugs, your life is over. Very few make it out. Very few.
As far as his death goes, what did you hear the circumstances were?
Well, I heard they found him sitting under a tree in a chair.
Right.
OD'd, yeah.
Do you believe it was OD or?
Accidental.
Okay.
Most of these guys that went that way, it was accidental. They didn't. They weren't tired of life. They
Right.
went through with life. They just, went one took over the line.
We did a shoot last night with Manny, and Manny talked about a drug deal that he was involved with, him and Buzz, and there was guns actually that were fired during the
Well, when you get involved with illegal drugs, you have to deal with people that will shoot you
Right.
if they think you're trying to screw them over.
How did you wind up leaving WCW?
Well, I had an incident in Baltimore with some fans, with Terry Funk and Ricky Flair, and had to slap a couple people around, and they threw him out of the building. The promoter Gary Capetta.
Right.
Gary
Jester?
Gary Jester,
Right.
excuse me. Gary Capetta, I believe, was the announcer.
Right.
Very good announcer, by the way. And Gary Justin let it back in the arena, so therefore they sued me. And Jim Hurd's theory was that I go to court, put my hand on the Bible, and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and admit that wrestling was worked, that it was manipulated. And I told him, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go out and court a law and say that I'm a phony. I've been a phony my whole life, because I wasn't.
Right.
I never looked at wrestling as fake. I looked at it as manipulated. And I wasn't prepared to do that. And he told me, he said, well, I admitted it in the, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal. And he picked up the paper off his desk and said, looky here. I admitted it. And I said, you're not Gary Hart. And I am. And you can kiss my ass and go to hell. I'm going home to Texas. So I quit.
Wow. Okay. What was the project you and Chris Adams were doing together in World Class 2?
We had done several things, independent promotions. Chris was trying to put together a television show. As you know, independent wrestling is very, very difficult to do. Financially, it's hard to get financing, and it's so expensive now with television and post-production and actually just to tape. Now it's cheaper because of the computers and things like that, but at this time period it was still linear, I believe they called it,
right,
rather than digital. And unless you had the capability of shooting a live show on tape the way we did for many, many years, then you'd have to go to post, and it cost so much money. It just never could get enough money to do it the right way.
You pretty much disappeared for a little period of time. What did you do around this time period?
Nothing.
Just relaxed?
I just, I had been in wrestling for 35 years in 95 when I decided enough is enough, So I just more or less hung out with my children and, raised them and enjoyed my life and had a good time. When I quit or retired, however you want to put it, I had a full cup. I'd had a great career. I traveled all over the world. I had no more mountains to climb. And to be honest with you, I hated the time in the dressing room. I hated airports. I hated getting in the car. I mean, I didn't hate wrestling. I loved that small little portion of time that we would go to the ring and we would have the match.
Right.
But all the things you had to do to get to do that, it wasn't worthwhile to me anymore. I mean, I got to the point where dressing rooms were like jail, airports were aggravating, driving 200-300 miles in a car. I just didn't want to do it. I would be driving at night, and you'd drive down the highway and you'd see lights on all the houses, and you'd say to yourself, why am I home with my family? So just one day I just said, this is it. I'm through. I'm finished. I'm gone. I'm not going to do it anymore. Not that I was unhappy. I wasn't bitter. I was just through. I just
burned out in a way.
Probably burned out is probably the best way. Not, like I say, not the portion of time that the actual performance took place.
Right.
I loved that.
You hated the schedule and travel.
I couldn't deal with that anymore. I didn't want that. If it would have been a secret way that I could have showed up 5 minutes before the match,
Right.
went to the ring, and had the match, I would have had no problem. But all the things you have to do. See, people, they only see that little small glimpse of you on TV. They don't understand or realize what entails to get to that moment, I mean, when I would be on 30, 35-day tours, and sometime twice on Saturday and twice on Sunday. Imagine. I remember I left Daytona Beach, Christmas. I took my boys to the barbershop, and they both got burr haircuts because they were getting into body surfing or boogie board surfing.
Right.
When I came back, their hair had grown out.
Wow.
I said, my God, what am I doing? I'm missing my children's childhood, and I had children late in life. I had my first child at 36, my second child at 38. And here I am at 48, and my little boys are growing up, and daddy's on the road. And I just didn't want that. I wanted to be with them. I didn't want to be in a hotel and call home and, hey, Daddy, when you're coming home? I didn't want that. I wanted to be with them. So it wasn't really hard for me to make that decision. It was very easy for me to say enough is enough.
How did you wind up in MLW for Court Bauer?
Court Bauer called me, and he was doing 15-year anniversary of I Quit with Terry Funk and Ricky Flair. I think he was doing it with Terry Funk and a young kid. What's his name?
Carino.
Yes, Steve Carino. And asked me if I would come and be a part of that. And I met Court then, and over a period of time, I became a dear friend of his, a very dear friend of mine now. I encouraged him, to send his resume to the WWE, and he was with them for quite some time. I think that he's probably one of the last guys that I really mentored to, and tried to help office-wise, not in wrestling, but how to conduct yourself in the inner office and how to get your ideas through and how to avoid problems that come up because everyone is jealous of the guy with the idea.
Right.
It's easier to sit around and talk about how bad his idea is rather than to come up with an idea for yourself. So he was the last guy I really spent a lot of time with and tried to help.
Do you think the company had potential, and do you think the company MLW had potential, or was it just a financial thing?
It's financially, as you well know, it is a very expensive proposition to supply yourself with the right talent, with airline fares and talent fees and arena cost and TV cost. And I think Court, being naive, he thought more was better, where I encourage guys, if you're going to promote independent shows, go with 10 to 12 guys that can have a match. Don't bring 20, 25 guys, because when you get 20 or 25 guys, you try to do 3 tapes in one evening. Number one, you're going to bore the people to death before the show is over. Number two, there's no way you can control that many matches. You can't be hands-on. So my advice always to him was smaller is better. Bring 12 guys, use them twice. Use 4 matches per tape.
Right.
3 if possible, 4 at the most. Concentrate your thinking around the smaller group. Financially, it's easier to take care of. Less plane fares, less talent fees, less hotel rooms. But, some people think bigger is better, and I think he spent a fortune trying to make a wrestling company.
What do you think in today's world of pro wrestling, what is missing from the sport?
Well, my thing always was when I would sit down and I would talk to a guy that I would potentially consider managing, I would ask him a question. I would say, what do you want? Do you want to be a superstar? I wouldn't use the word superstar. That's a new word. I said, do you want to be a star or do you want to be a main event wrestler? And the ones that told me I want to be a star, I walked away from.
Right.
The ones that said to me, I want to be a main event wrestler, those were the ones that I wanted to deal with. I think the modern day guys, they think that they are superstars. They think that their self-importance is well overblown. I think there's a handful of guys that are really, really good. Guys like John Cena, guys like Randy Orton, guys like Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Fit Finlay is another guy. But a lot of these guys, they look alike, they dress alike, they all come to the ring, get on the second rope, put up their hands, and want the people to cheer because they walk to the ring, for God's sakes.
So true.
Do something. Make the people respond. Once they do this, they forget the crowd is there. They go out and they do their 3 or 4 little high spots, wish spots, whatever they call them. And it's the same spots every time. It's boring. It's very, very boring. But you got a guy like Cena, who I think a lot of people are off of, but I think he's done tremendous. Randy Orton, I think he is fabulous. I think there are some guys that are really, really good. But even in my day, there were very few elite guys and a whole bunch of also-rans. Today, I think there's more also-rans and very few elite guys.
I agree. Who are your favorite guys that you like to work with as far as managing?
Well, Don Jardine would have been my all-time favorite. I really liked Gino Hernandez a lot, Mark Lewin a lot, Al Perez a whole lot. I mean, not only was I their manager, we were buddies. You know, we really liked each other personally. So those would have been my favorite ones.
Is there anybody that? Well, I guess there wouldn't be. I was going to ask you if there was anybody that you were with that you hated, but you pretty much chose everybody. So,
no, I would not, unless I felt that we could be friends. Because when you're a manager with a guy, I mean, that guy has to really trust you that you're going to do what's best for him, you know. And if you don't find a guy that you like, it's not easy to get people to do things that they don't want to do. And if you don't like a guy, you know, I mean, you're not going to go that extra mile for him. And I was very selective of guys I managed. I had a few guys that I did as favors for other people, but basically most of the guys that I managed, even now when I see them, like last night I saw the One Man Gang, haven't seen him in 20 years,
right,
come up and give me a big hug. You know, if I talk to Larry Sabisco or the Ultimate Warrior, you know, all these guys were with me when they were young.
I forgot to ask you about Dingo.
What
was he like as a person?
He was a terrific guy. Even when he made it big in New York, I was in WCW. I would see him at the airports. He was always very, very nice. He'd always come and give me a big hug, thank me for everything. Never had any problems with him. But like I said, I had very few problems with guys that I booked or managed. I always had a pretty good rapport with them, and we left on good terms too, which was always nice.
I guess if you're watching the sport today, who do you think that you've watched today that you could have made a lot of money with?
Helmsley,
right.
A guy like Orton, a guy like Batista. I believe I could have positioned them. I would be more selective of opponents for them,
right,
than they have somebody doing for them now. But I think Helmsley, I know he gets a lot of heat because he married Stephanie, but the guy was a big star even before it. Anyone would deny that he's the greatest thing in wrestling today. In my book, I think Bob Orton, Randy, Bob's son,
right,
is tremendous. I think John Cena gets a bad rap. I think the kid he goes out every time and has a good match. I think he's tremendous. He reminds me a lot of the Von Erich boys. I think, like I said, Batista, I think he's limited, but I see him like a Hulk the Road Warrior type guy. I think people really connect with him. I think he's very, very good. And probably there's a couple of other guys, that I'm overlooking, but those would be the three that I would say would fit in my time or any other time.
You once said that you made a mistake by not managing Leon White.
I did.
Why is that?
Well, I was so consumed and tied up with the great Muda that I passed on Leon. I think I could have really helped Leon in a lot of ways. Leon was a very insecure guy, I found out later. Leon had a few problems. He had difficulty dealing with others. I think he had a real lack of confidence in his ability. And I think I could have really helped him become grounded and realize who he is and what he had to offer and what his value was. And I think I could have made him a happier guy. I think a lot of times guys like Sid Vicious and other guys, they're in a situation where everyone's in their ear telling them this and that.
Right.
I think a lot of times it puts them on very unsteady ground. I think I could have grounded Leon White and really helped him a lot.
Who's the smartest man you ever worked with?
Smartest booker or
Talent.
talent? What do you mean by the smartest? Tell me.
Who pretty much listened to everything you told them and
Most all of them. I mean, they had confidence that Gary knew what he was doing and that Gary had their best interest at heart.
If Brody was still alive today, how do you think his career would have went up to this point?
I think Bruiser Brody would have been Bruiser Brody. I don't know how he would have handled corporate wrestling. I think he would have been much like me because he was a rebel at heart. He wanted to be Bruiser Brody, and anyone that tried to take that away was going to have trouble.
Do you think he would have ended up in ECW at some point, probably?
No, I don't.
Really?
I don't think so.
Just Japan and
I think Japan. Yeah, he had such a good deal in Japan.
I don't mean ECW that's on TV today. I mean the old ECW.
No, I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think Bruiser would have went that route. I really don't. I think Bruiser had such a good deal in Puerto Rico and such a good deal in Japan. And he also had New Zealand and he had Australia that were open for him too. And he made enough money. He had St. Louis, he had Texas, he had Indianapolis, he had Minneapolis. Bruiser had more work than he could handle. So I think he would have been okay. I think Bruiser would have been much like me. I think the beginning of the 90s, he would have hung it up and said, I've had it. Corporate wrestling is not for me.
Did you ever have a problem with Missing Link, Dewey Robinson?
Yeah, I did.
What was that story?
Well, I was the matchmaker, TV producer for World Class the last time. And Ken Mantell came back in and brought Missing Link and a couple other guys. And I don't know if I feel it was a setup. I think that Ken Mantell wanted Missing Link to attack me and do me harm. I believe that. That's what I believe. And I'm sitting in a dressing room one night and going over the show with Ed Watt, lining out the show, the intermissions and time limits and order of matches. And he snuck through the back door, came up behind me and hit me in my back of my head. And I thought, what the hell is that? Because wrestlers,
Right.
they do shit like that.
Right.
So I didn't pay too much attention. I didn't even look around. And then it was just an incident. Boom, he caught me again. This time he hit me in the temple and knocked me off the bench. I was straddling the bench and knocked me off the bench between the bench and the lockers. And that dazed me. I mean, I don't know if I was knocked out, but I was pretty dazed. And the next thing I saw, he was reaching over to pick me up. And I had a straight edge razor blade in my pocket that I always carry for my own protection. And when he bent over to pick me up, I started cutting him with the razor.
Wow.
And opened him up pretty good. And he ran, screamed like a bitch, ran out, no guts, no balls, you know. But I think he was put up to that by Ken Mantell.
How did it end? That was pretty much it?
That was it, brother. He didn't want no more to do with me.
Do you think a male manager could still get over today in wrestling? Because now
male?
Yeah, because now it's pretty much a lot of people.
Of course. It's would a male manager be allowed to be a male manager? Would the current promotion allow a person like me to exist? No.
Right.
Would they allow a person like Paul Ellery to exist? No. Would they allow a person like Jimmy Cornette to exist? I doubt it.
Does the lack of kayfabe in wrestling today bother you?
It did when it was exposed first by Turner's people in the Wall Street Journal. That really pissed me off. And when Vince exposed it, it really pissed me off. But as time has went by, you know, I've learned to live with it. And if they think that that's the way to go, but I know one thing, I was never a phony. I was never a faker. Did I manipulate? Yes, I did. But I wasn't someone that would lay down just because a promoter told me to. If I didn't want to do it, I wouldn't do it, and I would be prepared to take the consequences. And I was fired on multiple occasions because I didn't go along with what promoters wanted me to do. So I looked at myself in my era of wrestling. You had the right to say no. There was a price to pay for it, and some of us paid that price on more than one occasion. Where today, it's hard to say no because there's so few places to go.
Right.
So that's really the difference in wrestling. If there was multitude, if there were 5 places that you could go and make money, a promoter could not control you. The only way you can be controlled is when there's no place else to go. You either go home or you do what they want. I could not exist in that world.
You think a territory could work in this day and age?
Of course it could. Financially, it would be difficult for the first couple of years. But once you had your window of opportunity established on TV, you had your venue established, and you had your talent established, why couldn't you?
If somebody were to offer you a job as far as booking a territory, would you come back?
If they had financially, they could control it, they had enough money to make a go of it and pay your talent decent, yeah.
Are you surprised that Ric Flair's still on TV and wrestling to this day?
I think it's sad. You know, I think that Ricky is missing so much. You know, there is life after wrestling. Life is great when you don't have to be someplace every evening. And I just think Ricky is in the mode of, I've got to do this. Dusty is the same. Terry Funk was the same. I was blessed. I didn't have to continue being Gary Hart to be happy. I could go home, hang out with my children, and do other things and be very happy. Some guys, their only way they identify themselves is, I'm so-and-so in wrestling. And I think that's a curse. It's so nice to reflect on my career, but it wouldn't be nice if I was still trying to build on that legacy. I mean, it would be ridiculous. And
right.
I just feel bad when I see guys like Dusty or Ricky or Terry Funk. I will say one thing about Ricky. He doesn't cut his match short. He doesn't cheat the fans. He still goes out and has a tremendous match. But I hate to see him do it. I hated to see it when Luthez did it. I hated it when Fritz did it. You know, I hated it when I saw Eddie Graham doing it. You know, I believe when you get into your late 40s, early 40s, it's time to hang it up. I just don't think it's a good idea to wrestle into your 50s or 60s. I just think that's wrong.
What are your thoughts on newsletters and the internet? Think it's good for business or bad?
The internet, I think you can't very much trust what's written. I mean, there are so many rumors and so much gossip. It's like I tell you a story, you tell someone else the same story, you tell someone else the story and the story and the story.
Right.
And by the time it gets out here, it's nothing like. As far as the dirt sheets, you know, I think the people that write them try to project themselves as legitimate, you know, commentators and represent themselves as someone that's part of the news media. There's been all kinds of shit written about me and the Von Erichs and Bruiser Brody, and not one of these guys have ever called me on the phone and got my opinion or asked me.
What's the biggest misconception that they've said?
Oh, everything, you know, everything. I mean, they don't understand who I am. They don't understand my accomplishments. They don't understand. A lot of times, I remember with the great Muda, this guy, he kept saying, you know, that I was sandbagging Muda because I needed a job. You know, come on, I created the great Muda. I didn't need a job. I could have been with Leon White. I could have been with Sid Vicious. But they keep printing it, you know. So I tried not to read them. I just looked at them as gossip columnists, not serious news people. And I guess, you know, you can gain some knowledge from these newsletters, but
right.
I really don't bother reading them, you know. I mean, because they really don't have any insight to it.
Any good Rhodes stories that stick out in your mind?
Not really. I wasn't that kind of guy, you know.
Right.
I mean, I was...
Or ribs?
No, I wasn't. I didn't like ribs. I thought ribs were something that was really disruptive to talent, embarrassing guys, making light of a guy, making a guy feel foolish. I never saw that as a good thing. I didn't like ribs. I didn't like that in my office when I was running things.
I guess, what do you think is the biggest missing ingredient from wrestlers on indie shows today?
They don't know how to have a match. They know how to do a few, I believe they call them wish spots or high spots or may I spots. They don't know how to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. All they know how to do is to go out and do a bunch of stuff. And they never pay any attention to the crowd. You know, of my generation, we would play a crowd like a fiddle. We would listen to the response. We would get the vibe from them. If we were doing something that was getting some attention, we would stay on it. If we were doing something and no one was buying it, we would get away from it like it was a snake.
Right.
We paid attention to the reaction we got from what we were doing, and we made the crowd part of it. Nowadays, the young guys, not all of them, but most of them, like I said, they recognize the crowd one time when they get introduced and they go on the second rope and they say, look at me. And then that's it. Then they forget the crowd. I think you have to be a main event wrestler and to be a successful wrestler, you have to make the crowd part of it. I don't mean going and cursing him and hollering at him, but realizing the reaction you get from them with things you do. And that's what my generation did better than anyone else.
That's true.
There were times with Mark Lewin and Dusty Rhodes that they wouldn't even touch for 5 or 6 minutes, and people would be going crazy. Nowadays, you couldn't get that because no one pays attention to the crowd. They go out and they say, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. And if the crowd don't like it, that's okay. So that's lost. And that's why independent and big-time wrestling is suffering.
Speaking of, well, let's talk about the media. We talked about it a little bit earlier on. What do you think about all the attention the media now is giving wrestling in regards to drugs after the Benoit tragedy?
In some ways, it's good. Anytime you shine a light on something, if it comes and helps, and so many guys since the 80s, I really noticed steroids coming into our business in the 80s. So many guys have died. And I'm not saying that steroids done properly probably are very good. But when they're abused, they're very harmful. What happened with Benoit was a tragedy. I never met the kid. I didn't know him. I did know Nancy quite well. And it was heart-wrenching when I heard the way she had to die. I don't blame it on steroids. I don't blame it on any kind of drugs. Something like that is something that you can't prevent it. I don't know what happened. I don't know what caused him to do what he did. I don't think saying, oh, well, he was on steroids or he was on, different kinds of drugs. There's a lot of people that do steroids that don't kill anyone. There's a lot of people that do drugs that don't kill anyone. I think this was a special, unique situation. What caused it to happen, God only knows, and we'll never know.
Right.
I think the media jumped on it like they would to Anna Nicole, the way they did the bridge collapsing in Minneapolis, the way they're doing right now with the miners in Utah. In my estimation, the media are the biggest bunch of whores ever invented. If my grandparents sat down and watched the news media today, they would turn it off. They would have nothing to do with it. And I think that it was a segment. All these cable stations, they know if they get on and they blast Vince and they talk about tragedy, their rating's going to jump 2 or 3 points. And they use it to benefit themselves, and they could care less. They could care less about what happened to Nancy or Daniel or Chris for that matter. They could care less what kind of slander they bring to the WWE or what they do harm to Vince's business. I'm sure that Vince McMahon didn't want anything like that to happen. I'm sure Linda is as horrified as the rest of us. They don't want that. I mean, that's the worst possible thing that could happen. And how could you hold Vince responsible for that would be like holding Gary Hart responsible for what happened to the Von Erichs and Gino and Chris Adams. God knows I tried, but it's personal choice. And I just think the media went overboard and they blew it way out of proportion. I'm not saying the act that was committed, it was heinous, it was beyond horrible, but that was a personal, private thing that happened, and they try to make it part of all of wrestling. I never beat my wife. I never choked my children. I never abused my children or my wife. I mean, did I smoke pot? Yes. I knew guys that did acid. I knew guys that did speed. I never knew them to do that. So to say that some way wrestling is responsible, that's just an easy way to point a finger if you want to say they're bad.
Right.
But I just think it was a horrible tragedy.
Looking back at your career, do you have any regrets?
Not really, man. I feel like I was one of the most fortunate guys in the world. I came from the inner city of Chicago. A street kid, high school education, got involved in wrestling, traveled the whole world, had a great career, made a lot of money, had a lot of great times.
Is there anything you want to say to your fans out there that you never had a chance to say to?
Thanks for the support. Which is very true, and a lot of guys don't say it, but it's true. Without the ticket buying public, we would be there in the ring all by ourselves. And I appreciate, the trust that they gave me, that when they saw a guy walk to the ring with me, they said, oh, he's with Gary. He must be okay. And you know what better compliment can I say than thank you very much for all your support all those years.
Well, thanks for being here with us today. It was a great interview.
Hey, I enjoy it, man. I hope it comes out well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
TitleMatchNetwork.com